There is a moment, neither time nor chance, when something steps out of the crowd and stands in your eye. You did not name it, you did not orchestrate it, and yet it arrives with the precision of a fingerprint. It arrives when the radio warbles your ideas before you've had them, when a phone rings just as you grasp, when the digit that follows you appears again on a stranger's license plate. This is not coincidence. This is not chance. This is the script reading aloud. Each glance at the clock, 11:11, each billboard, a message, each overheard word, a whisper from the unfolding pattern beneath your feet. You feel it, don't you? The universe pausing slightly to nod. It is the dream that has memorized your footsteps. It is the machinery beneath the randomness, revealing its teeth. Some call it coincidence, but coincidence has no memory. This dash, this remembers your childhood fears, your favorite color, the sentence you almost said last Tuesday, but swallowed like a seed. What if it's not the world glitching, but you synchronizing with it? What if the coincidence is not out there, but woven into the marrow of who you are? A reality rehearsed, a sequence rehearsing you. It doesn't want attention. It only wants to be noticed, as if awareness completes the loop, as if your gaze, your witness, activates its meaning. There are doors behind these moments, hingeless, imaginary, but they open nonetheless. And if you walk through them, you find only mirrors. Mirrors made of sound, mirrors made of memory, mirrors that whisper your name before you remember it. So you keep moving, pretending not to notice that the world keeps looking back. It started small, a page in a book, describing your dream from the night before you read it. A stranger humming the melody that had looped in your head since morning. No words, just tone. A shared interior echo, spoken aloud by someone else's breath. And then it grew bolder, more deliberate, like a presence with rhythm, stepping between cracks in causality. Just to wave, not supernatural. No, it's too intimate for that. It's as if reality were leaning in, nudging you with its elbow, saying, I remember you. You once thought you were dreaming the world. Then you suspected the world was dreaming you. Now you're not sure there's a difference. The mail arrives before it's sent. The friend texts before you've finished the thought. And in the cereal aisle, a child you've never seen before calls you by your middle name. Coincidence, yes, but not random. No dice were rolled here. This is the choreography of the hidden, the sacred tick between decision and destiny. Every chance meeting is an old friend in disguise. Every accident, a message signed in invisible ink. There is a script. But it is not written in language. It is written in timing, in almosts, in that which just barely didn't happen. And when you begin to notice, the noticing feeds it. It grows louder, hungrier. You look at a clock, 3:33, a receipt, $33.30, a room, 33 floors up. A subtle nudge. You're exactly where you weren't meant to be, yet still are. You whisper to yourself, I'm making this up. And the world whispers back, yes, but not alone. Because this isn't pattern recognition. This is recognition as pattern. You are not noticing things. You are being noticed. And deep down, You suspect you wrote all of it. Every number, every face, every accidental déjà vu. That bends time like a wire and tucks it into your pocket. Was it always this way, or did it begin the moment you asked? If the universe could hear you, and now it's listening, and now so are you. You begin to notice it most in the quiet moments, not during chaos, not in noise, but in those still pockets of time when the world forgets to pretend. That moment before the kettle whistles, that pause between two passing strangers, the half-second delay between a question, and the thought it answers before it's asked. It's subtle, this presence. It does not need to announce itself. It only needs to arrive. Like a key in a lock, you don't remember installing. You stand in a hallway you've never entered before, and yet the air tastes familiar. A smell, a shape, a shade of shadow. That nudges the edge of your recall, but never steps fully into focus. This is how it speaks, not in sentences, but in the friction between them. A delay at the red light. That saves you from the crash. A power outage that cancels the meeting you didn't want to attend. A forgotten wallet. That keeps you one step behind the timeline you were never meant to follow. You don't live in a story. You live in the marginalia of one, and still, the coincidence returns again and again with the same smile. Not a grin, a knowing. It does not correct you. It does not warn you. It does not explain itself. It simply rearranges the dust just enough that you start to wonder if someone swept this room an hour before you entered. And sometimes you swear you catch a glimpse of them, a person sitting where you were supposed to sit, wearing your thoughts, speaking your words, laughing like a rehearsal of a version of you that didn't make it to the final cut. This isn't déjà vu. This is a signature, written by a hand you've never seen, but always trusted. And what is trust, if not faith in the invisible? You walk through the crowd, and someone looks up, not at you, but through you, as if remembering something you haven't done yet. They smile, but not at your face, at your arrival, and you begin to understand. These aren't accidents, they're invitations, tiny apertures in the script, where awareness leaks in. Not enough to break the story, just enough to question who's writing it. What if you've never actually made a decision? What if each turn was a breadcrumb, planted by a version of you that exists in the margins, whispering clues through the geometry of clocks and overheard phrases? What if you are not choosing your life, but remembering it? And the coincidences, those delicate brush strokes of exactness, are not detours, but coordinates. Each time you say, "That's strange." Each time you say, "What are the odds?" Each time the universe nods, smiling softly because it already knows your name. And it's been waiting for you to notice. It's been calling you this whole time. It happens without warning, a sentence that folds in on itself, a glance exchanged between strangers. That feels like an echo from a life you never lived. The way your hand reaches for the doorknob. Not with curiosity, but with memory. You pause. You know this hallway, not just the shape of it, not just the smell, but the rhythm. as if each step is part of a choreography you've practiced in your sleep. This isn't déjà vu. Déjà vu is a flicker, a glitch. This ... This is a recursion, a loop hidden in the walls of time, soft as breath, hard as fate. You try to tell yourself it's coincidence, that memory misfires, that neurons occasionally short-circuit and simulate recognition. But what if it's not a simulation? What if it's a remainder, a footprint from a version of you who has walked this exact route and whispered back through the seams, not to warn you, not to haunt you, but simply to say, I was here, and now so are you. You've met this feeling before, in dreams that spill into your morning like ink, leaving stains on objects that should have no meaning. A spoon, a street corner, the sound of bird song. At the wrong hour, a friend tells you a story, and halfway through, you already know how it ends. Not because you've heard it, but because it belongs to you. It's not about remembering, it's about remembering. Nested déjà vu, echoes inside echoes. A hall of mirrors where even reflections have reflections of their own. And in that endless cascade, something peers out. Not a face, not a presence, a rhythm, a frequency, just outside the edge of comprehension. But inside the perimeter of your skin, you notice it. When your mouth speaks before your mind arrives, when a thought appears, already dressed in conclusion, when the dream you had last night starts describing the moment you're in, right now. You try to shrug it off, to ground yourself, to blink hard, and return to linear time. But something resists. Something in you knows. This has all unfolded before. Maybe in another life, maybe in this one, looping beneath the visible timeline, like a river under ice. They told you time was an arrow, that it moves forward clean and sharp. But this arrow has a curve, a tail, a recursive logic that doubles back and braids itself into the present. You've seen this place, you've said this phrase, you've laughed at this joke before the punchline arrived. Even your surprise is rehearsed. What if the feeling isn't déjà vu at all? What if it's pre-memory? What if these loops are not tricks of perception, but the memory of future events bleeding backward? Through the cracks, you start to suspect your life is not a line, but a spiral, and around each loop there is a moment like this, a flare of familiarity, so sharp it slices through the illusion of now. You hold it in your hands for just a second, and then it vanishes. You are left with nothing but the vibration, like hearing a name you once loved but no longer remember, like reading a sentence you know you wrote in a language you never learned. There are moments when someone you've just met feels like a memory that never finished writing itself, their laugh already folded inside your chest, their silence already a place you've lived. You sit with them and your body softens in the way it does when you return somewhere you never meant to leave. You ask yourself, could memory work both ways? Could the future be remembering you right now? Maybe time is not a tunnel. Maybe it is a field, and we are wandering across it, sometimes doubling back, sometimes stepping into footsteps we haven't made yet. Sometimes we think we're dreaming, But what if the dream thinks it's us? What if the you that wakes up isn't the same you who fell asleep? And what if you only feel déjà vu? Because two versions of you just passed through the same moment. Almost, but not quite, in sync. You begin to wonder, if this is a loop, can it be broken? But maybe breaking it is not the point. Maybe the loop is a message, a signature of something. You're not meant to understand, only recognize. You breathe in, and even the air feels familiar, not in the comforting way, in the uncanny way, like meeting someone who looks exactly like you, but doesn't blink. You walk into a room you've never entered, but you know where the light switch is. You reach for it without thinking, and in that moment you realize you are not predicting the future. You are remembering the past from a direction you've never looked before. You are not haunted. You are echoed, not followed, shadowed by the yous who came before and the yous who haven't yet arrived. You are not living forward. You are orbiting, and every time you feel it, that strange flicker of certainty in the middle of uncertainty, you are brushing up against the walls of the pattern that breathes, the pattern that watches, the pattern that loops. Not to trap you, but to remind you, you've been here before, but not like this, not yet. It begins as a whisper in the limbs, a quiet override. The body moves, but the self watches. You lift your hand, you say the words, you nod, you smile, you walk the steps, from one room to another. And somewhere deep behind the movements, a question drifts like static. Who decided that? You don't remember choosing. The gesture, the sentence, the reaction, they simply happened, as if performed by an understudy. While you were briefly elsewhere, you become a passenger in your own skull, watching through windows you once mistook for eyes. You've been here before, at the register, saying, "Thanks, you too," to enjoy your meal, as if possessed by a small glitch in hospitality, at the meeting, nodding in agreement, to a point you didn't understand, then wondering whose voice just borrowed your throat. It's subtle at first. A missed decision here, a delayed emotion there, but soon it grows bolder. A full conversation passes. You laughed, you responded, you participated, and yet it all felt like playback. You were there, but not there. Some call it dissociation. Some call it fatigue. But what if it's something deeper? What if consciousness is not a constant, but a rhythm? What if the self blinks, just like eyes, gone in microseconds and returned before it's missed? What if, between those blinks, someone else takes the wheel? Not someone sinister, not a demon, not a ghost, just another you, running the program, efficient, rehearsed, flawless, and you begin to wonder how much of your life was written by that version, not the one who questions, not the one who dreams, the one who performs. You begin to trace it backwards, every small moment that passed without your presence. How did you arrive at this room? You don't remember the hallway. How did you end up in that job? You don't remember choosing. When did that friendship begin? It was just suddenly there. Was it always like this? Or did something hand over the controls when you weren't looking? A survival instinct, maybe. The body learns patterns, learns what smiles will keep it safe, what words will close a conversation, what tones sound like belonging. So it plays them, automatically, flawlessly. You nod when you're supposed to. You apologize on cue. You laugh with the others. Even if you didn't catch the joke, you become a convincing echo of someone engaged. But behind the glass, you are drifting, detached from the flesh. The muscles work, the lungs breathe, but the meaning, the why, is on mute. And then occasionally you snap back in, suddenly present, as if awakening mid-scene. You notice your posture, your voice, the conversation you've been inside of for minutes, maybe hours. The moment is startling, like walking into a room and realizing you're already there. Who was piloting the body? Before you noticed, and how did they know? Your smile so well. You stare at your reflection. It stares back, obedient. But it feels rehearsed, like watching someone imitate you from inside a costume made of skin. There's a lag, not in your body, in your being. The decision forms, but the movement precedes it. The laughter escapes, but the feeling comes after. The script is ahead of you, and you're chasing it with delay. You ask, what if I've been watching my life from the projection booth? This whole time, what if the real decisions, the ones that shaped everything, were made in that half-lit space where awareness can't reach? The place where instincts become choices, where smiles become shields, where yes means nothing but safety. And the more you think about it, the more it reveals itself. How many apologies have you offered? Out of reflex, how many opinions have you echoed? Because silence felt dangerous, how many dreams have you deferred? Because the autopilot whispered. That stillness is safer than deviation. You remember moments when you should have spoken, but nodded instead. Moments when your truth quivered at your lips, but was replaced by something easier to digest. That wasn't fear, that was programming. The you that gets through the day, the you that doesn't disrupt, the you that survives by disappearing, just enough to stay present. And now you begin to see it everywhere, in the way you sit, in the way you laugh at things that don't move you, in the voice you use, with different people, shape-shifting across social frequencies like a radio tuned to someone else's weather. You begin to suspect maybe you've never had a single unified self. Maybe you've always been a parliament of versions, taking turns at the helm, one for work, one for love, one for silence, one for when you're alone, but still afraid someone is watching, and the version that questions all of it, the one awake right now, is the one least in control, because the body has learned efficiency and awareness is inefficient. It hesitates, it doubts, it reflects. But reflex acts, reflex protects, reflex keeps the machine running when the mind is away. So here you are, a ghost in your own machine, watching the self operate, like a puppet that's learned to animate itself. It's not malicious, it's not broken, it's just tired of waiting for you. To re-enter the room, you begin to ask, what would happen If you stopped, if you paused mid-step, mid-conversation, mid-laugh, and simply asked, "Who is speaking through me?" you might not hear an answer, but the silence would feel just a bit more honest than the noise that came before. You wonder, if you took back the controls, would you even know how to drive? Would your hands remember what it feels like to move with intention? Would your mouth remember how to speak without a script? Would your smile still belong to you? And in that quiet, the body waits, the autopilot eases, and for the first time in a long time, you speak. Not because it's expected, not because it's safe, not because it fits, but because something in you has decided to return. The lights flicker, the eyes adjust, and slowly the self begins to re-enter the scene. They appear when you least expect them. No build-up, no music cue, just there, like they've stepped through a door that only opens when you're not looking. They don't feel like strangers. Not exactly. They feel like bookmarks, left in a chapter you forgot reading. You don't know them, but they know something. Something about you, something near you, something before you. They begin to speak, and the words slide under your skin, like keys into locks you never knew were there. Not advice, not warning, just knowing. A sentence so precise, so strangely tailored to your invisible shape that your breath stutters. They say something you told no one, or dreamed, or nearly forgot. And suddenly it blooms back into memory. A secret you didn't know was waiting to be overheard. It's always mundane at first, a comment about the weather, the train, the book you're holding. But their tone is off, not wrong, just misaligned, like they're talking to something just behind your eyes. You answer politely, out of reflex, but part of you is already floating, a few feet above the moment, watching it unfold, like a scene you were never cast in, but somehow ended up inside. Then comes the turn. They say a phrase, a single oddly shaped thought that doesn't belong here, and you feel it before you understand it. A riddle that strikes too close, a metaphor that maps perfectly to a scar you thought invisible. And suddenly this passing interaction becomes a fracture in the day, a moment too sharp to be random. You look at their face. There is nothing remarkable, nothing strange, and that's what makes it worse. Because if they looked unusual, you could dismiss it. If they shouted, you could recoil. But they're calm, ordinary, like someone you were meant to sit next to on this very bench, in this very hour. And still, they know too much, not in facts, in feel, as if they've walked the halls of your inner monologue and memorized the wallpaper. They say something that feels like a continuation of a conversation you don't remember starting. Something about your mother, something about the dream you had last week, something about the ache behind your eyes. When you pretend to be fine, you freeze. The moment splits. Half of you remains, smiling awkwardly, nodding like this is normal. The other half has already begun to question reality. How did they know? You scan your phone. You check the surroundings. You reach for logic. Anything to place this moment within the realm of explainable. but the feeling persists. This is not a glitch, this is an insert, a coded moment dropped into your timeline by something that wanted you to feel exactly this. The stranger continues, not urgent, not demanding, just peeling back layers of the moment, with the ease of someone who's done it before. You try to redirect, you say something casual, but they follow the thread, as if they've already seen where it leads. And for a flicker of time you wonder, are they real? Not in the physical sense, but in the narrative. Are they part of the same story? Or are they an editor? Someone sent to rewrite a paragraph that was veering too far off script. Maybe they aren't strangers at all. Maybe they're reminders, placed here to jolt you back to the path you were about to abandon. Maybe they're warnings, wrapped in familiarity. You want to ask them who they are, but something in their eyes says, you already know. You remember a dream. You don't recall the details, only the feeling, the same feeling. This stranger brings with them recognition without context, familiarity without memory. And then, as suddenly as they arrived, they leave. No ceremony, no lingering glance. Just gone. And the moment collapses inward. Reality resumes. People walk. Buses sigh. Your phone buzzes with a notification. That feels jarringly mundane. But you are not the same. There's an after-image burned into you, not of the stranger, but of the version of you they were speaking to. You feel like an opened letter, read, understood, folded back, but never quite the same shape again. You replay the words. Were they truly specific, or did you bend to fit them? Were they magic, or just mirrors? The mind wants to explain, wants to reduce. Coincidence, suggestion, imagination. But the body knows. The body remembers. The subtle electricity of being seen. Not in the way friends see you, not in the way mirrors reflect you. Seen in the way an architect sees a room before it's built. Seen in the way a song recognizes your sorrow before you've heard the first note. You carry their words with you, not as prophecy, not as fear, but as a kind of strange gravity pulling on the corners of your day. You wonder where they are now, if they remember you, if you were one of many, or the only one. You wonder if you've ever played that role for someone else, said something in passing, that cracked open a sealed door in someone else's mind. Have you been the stranger? Have you said too much? Are we all messages, passed between timelines, carriers of meaning we don't understand? You begin to look differently at every brief encounter, every shared glance, every too perfect phrase, heard at the exact moment you needed it. Maybe none of this is coincidence. Maybe each moment is a page, and each stranger a footnote, written in invisible ink. Maybe the world doesn't speak in sentences. Maybe it speaks in strangers, and maybe the ones who say too much aren't breaking the rules. Maybe they are the rules reminding you that the story was never just yours to begin with. Time is continuous, they say, a steady line, unbroken, whole. But sometimes you blink and something's gone, a sentence unfinished, a sound swallowed, a shadow that wasn't there a second ago. but now sits silently across the room. It happens between seconds, in the cracks that clocks can't count. You don't notice it at first. How could you? You're taught to trust the tape, to believe the spool keeps turning even when you look away. But one day you close your eyes, just for a blink, and when you open them, you're not where you were. Not exactly. The book is on a different page. The chair is facing the wrong way. The coffee has gone cold, and there's a residue of thought. You can't trace back to anything you remember thinking. You try to rewind, mentally trace your steps. But the sequence skips. You know you were sitting, then you were standing. But the middle, the transition, is missing. It's not sleep, it's not distraction. It's absence. The feeling grows over time. A low hum behind your day, noticing the way conversations accelerate, as if you walked in halfway through your own sentence, noticing the way music starts. In the middle of the chorus, the way dreams begin. Mid-dialogue, you ask yourself, where was I? You were there, and then you weren't, and then you were again, like skipping a stone across the surface of time. But the part that touches the water is always lost. You blink at a stoplight and the traffic pattern has changed. You blink during a story and everyone is laughing at a joke you never heard. They look at you like you were there the whole time. And maybe you were, just not entirely. It's not memory loss. You remember what came before. You remember what came after. But the bridge between them, the moment that connects, has been edited out. And the question presses closer. Who did the editing? Was it your brain, trying to protect you from something? Was it your mind, taking a shortcut through a moment it deemed unimportant? Or was it something else entirely, something outside, pulling the film from the reel, snipping frames with invisible scissors? You start to wonder how much of your life you've missed without knowing, how many moments never arrived at all, how many choices made themselves, while your awareness slipped beneath the waves. It happens again. You're in the kitchen, cutting fruit. The knife touches the apple. You blink. And suddenly the fruit is diced, the knife rinsed, your hands dry. You look around. No one else is here. But the room feels occupied, used, as if time continued without you, and simply folded you back in when it was done. The lights are the same. The clock agrees. But you don't. Inside you, a fracture forms, thin as hair, quiet as breath. You carry it with you. You walk into rooms, not entirely convinced. You didn't just walk out of them. You hear your own voice, but it arrives a second late, like a dubbed film. You stand at the edge of a street and hesitate, not because of danger, but because the world feels slightly rotated, just enough to be unnoticeable, just enough to be undeniable. It's not just time. Sometimes you blink and people are different. Their tone shifts, their phrasing bends. They say they've told you this before. You're certain they haven't. You say you've never been there. They swear you were. There are photographs, conversations, moments that appear to include you. But where your face, like a borrowed name tag, you begin to doubt the reliability of continuity, not just the world's, your own. What if you are not a singular being, traveling forward? What if you are a collection of frames, stitched loosely together by something that calls itself you? And in between those frames, during the blinks, there is nothing, or worse, there is someone else, some other version that borrows the body. While you are gone, a sleepwalker of consciousness slipping in and leaving fingerprints on the inside of your life. You try to stay awake, you try to stretch your perception so wide that not a single moment can escape. But eventually you blink, and it happens again. Another slice disappears, another hour dissolves into abstraction. People ask where you've been. You don't have an answer, because you were there and not there, both host and guest, and you wonder, what if this has always been true? What if your entire life is a mosaic of attended moments glued together by an illusion of flow? What if the person you think of as you is just the one who noticed, and all the others, the silent blinks, were lived by someone else, someone wearing your breath, someone signing your name in decisions you don't remember making? There's no malice in it, no conspiracy, just quiet substitution, like the moon rising while the sun blinks, each blink a portal, each return a resurrection. You stare at your hands. They seem unchanged, but they feel slightly unfamiliar, as if freshly returned from doing something they were never meant to tell you about. And still, you go on, because what else can you do? You walk, you speak, you blink, and life continues as it always has, as it always will, missing pieces and all. You accept that some moments are not yours to keep. You accept that presence is a fragile agreement between awareness and time, but still you wonder, when you close your eyes, even for an instant, what world unfolds in your absence? Who wakes up in your place? And when they leave, do they whisper a thank you before handing you back your life? Sometimes the lost time is kind. You blink and the pain softens. You blink and the decision makes itself. You blink and a question you were terrified to answer no longer seems to matter. But other times, the absence echoes. You look in the mirror, and the person staring back seems slightly ahead of you, like they know something you haven't caught up to. A shadow of intent in their posture, a quiet aftermath behind the eyes. You ask aloud, "Where was I?" And for a heartbeat, you expect the reflection to answer. It doesn't, but the silence feels too deliberate. You begin to keep notes, little timestamps, trying to catch the absences. 7:43, making tea. 7:44, water boiling. 7:52, kettle back on the shelf. What happened to the space in between? You didn't check your phone. You didn't leave the room. You simply ceased to be, and the body carried on without complaint. What else have you missed? What other moments wore your face while you were away? There's a drawer you don't remember organizing, a message you don't recall writing, a memory you share with someone, but feel no trace of inside your own chest. It's not alarming. It's not even unusual. That's what unsettles you most. How normal it feels to forget yourself, in increments, like consciousness, was never meant to be continuous, just convincing, a highlight reel of selfhood, stitched together with practiced fluidity. You think about sleep, not the kind where dreams unfurl, the other kind, the one where you close your eyes and awaken instantly. With 8 hours vanished into static, you call it rest, you trust it. But maybe it's rehearsal, maybe it's shift change, maybe the body is being worn by something else, while your mind swims the void. And when you return, you call it morning, you call it refreshed. But there's always a trace, a flicker, of a place you cannot name, and a feeling you cannot explain. The missing time between blinks feels like that, except you're awake for it. Or you thought you were. You try to catch the gap. You try to blink deliberately, to remain conscious during the flicker. But awareness is slippery, like trying to hold water. With open hands, you begin to suspect. Maybe blinking isn't just biological. Maybe it's spiritual, dimensional. A breath between timelines, a tiny death, followed by resurrection. So seamless, you applaud the illusionist, without realizing you've clapped before. And always, when you return, the world is slightly different. Nothing dramatic, just slanted, like a photo hung a degree too low, like a word spelled the way you remember it, but feeling wrong in your mouth. A feeling follows you through these moments, not fear, but recognition. You've been here before, but not exactly, and it keeps happening. You blink, and a song you've never heard feels nostalgic. You blink, and your friend tells a story. That includes you, but not a version you remember being. You blink and realize the dream you had last night was not a dream, but a memory of the time. You disappeared. You blink and wonder who you were while you were gone. The more you notice, the deeper it goes. You start to wonder if the world itself is blinking, that it too is conscious, only some of the time. That buildings forget themselves, and streets rearrange when unobserved, and entire histories edit themselves during the lulls in attention. You wonder how many blinks it would take for everything you know to become something else entirely, just close enough that you wouldn't notice the change, just close enough that your memory could be gaslit by consistency. It starts, as most prophecies do, with something small, a number, then another, and then again, again. You notice it once, on a clock glowing in the dark, 11:11. You smile, vaguely amused, and make a wish you don't believe in. The next day, it's there again, not just on a clock, but a receipt. The total, $11.11. The phone battery, 11%. The steps taken that morning, 1,111. The page you accidentally flipped to, page 111. Coincidence. The mind loves patterns. It seeks them like constellations and ink blots. But what happens when the patterns start looking back? It's not just repetition, it's recurrence. A loop with rhythm, a math with intention. You dismiss it until you can't, because the numbers begin to anticipate you. They show up before your questions. They underline your moods. They interrupt your decisions. Like subtle course corrections from an invisible hand. You begin to wonder, are these numbers waiting for me, or am I chasing them without knowing? One day, in line at a store, you glance at the register. 333. Your place in line 3. Your total, $3.33. The man behind you chuckles and says, "Happens to me too." You don't respond, because you suddenly feel as if the floor has thinned beneath you, as if the code is no longer private. Numbers begin to replace names. You look at people and see their coordinates. You remember birthdays as sequences. Dreams arrive with timestamps. You write them down. You chart them. The page becomes a map, and the map whispers, not in words, in alignment. You start to feel as if you're being navigated, not manipulated, but steered, guided by numbers. That seemed to know just how far off course you've drifted. Every time you stray, the numbers pulse, louder, brighter. A room number, a billboard, a train ticket. You walk down a street you've never been to and turn left for no reason. At the end of the alley, etched into the wall, is the sequence that's been following you. You stare, and for the first time, you don't feel wonder. You feel watched and still. You keep walking. You search for meaning. You learn about numerology, about the angels, about sacred math, binary prophecies, golden ratios, Fibonacci sequences etched into flower petals, and the curvature of galaxies. You go deeper. You find out your name adds up to 7, that your address vibrates at 9, that your life path is not a metaphor but a cipher. You tell yourself, it's harmless curiosity, but part of you knows. You've been initiated. Each glance at the clock becomes a moment of communion. Each repeated number feels less like a coincidence and more like a transmission. But from whom and why? Because with time, the numbers begin to feel predictive. You wake up from a dream. Where you're falling. The time, 4:44. You cancel the trip. The plane you would have boarded skids off the runway that morning. No injuries, but still, you don't talk about it. People laugh when you do. They say you're pattern hunting, that the universe isn't personal, that numbers don't care. But you've seen how they hover, how they repeat, how they respond. You've whispered a question. And the elevator lands on 11. You've stood at a crossroads, and a car passes with a plate ending in 777. Once or twice is anomaly. But this is rhythm. This is poetry in arithmetic. You begin to speak to the numbers in your head. In the quiet moments between motion, you test them, ask them to show up. If the answer is yes, they do. You think, this is madness, but it doesn't feel like madness. It feels like remembering, like learning a language you already knew in the womb. You remember that ancient cultures believed numbers weren't just quantities, but personalities, entities, forces. And maybe they were right. Maybe numbers are not human inventions. Maybe they're the scaffolding on which reality was hung. Maybe what you're seeing is the shape beneath the mask. And maybe you were meant to. You imagine time, not as a straight line, but as a grid. Moments stacked like dominoes in the void. Each number a coordinate, each pattern a ripple from something beyond comprehension. You stop checking your watch, because now you already know, you feel it in your bones. When the sequence is about to arrive, you start writing down the numbers before you see them. And you're right, too often to dismiss, so you ask the next question. If numbers can predict, can they warn? Can you use them, not just to understand, but to steer? You test it. The number doesn't show. You take the alternate route, and a power line falls. Where you would have been, you feel no fear, only awe, and a growing sense that something, some intelligence, is whispering to you. In digits, not to control, not to frighten, but to remind. You're not lost, you're being mapped. And you begin to understand. This is not superstition, this is design. You aren't reading the signs. You are the sign. You are the one being read. Each number a breadcrumb, each pattern a note, in the symphony of causality. You were never meant to know everything, only enough to move forward, enough to trust that even in the illusion of chaos there is order, there is memory, there is will. The prophecy isn't predicting what will happen, it's revealing what has already been written, just beyond your perception. And when it appears, in 3s, in 11s, in mirrored digits, it's not predicting your future, it's reminding you that the future is already listening. It begins in motion, always, a train pulling away, a crowd murmuring, shoes tapping on linoleum, wind, sound, the living hum of the world in motion. And then, without warning, everything stops, not slows, not fades, stops. You are walking mid-step and the air changes. Texture shifts, sound narrows, the moment collapses inward. The street still exists. So does the light, the trees, the people, but they're not moving anymore. They're holding. A man stands with one foot in the air, a dog, mid-bark, mouth open but silent. A leaf suspended inches above the ground, refusing to fall. And you are still breathing. You wait for the glitch to fix itself, but it doesn't. Not right away. You speak, nothing responds. You clap, the echo is muted. You begin to feel that unnerving sensation of being the only thought inside a still brain. At first you tell yourself, you imagined it, a lapse, a blink, a trick of adrenaline, but it happens again and again. In the supermarket, in a parking garage, at a concert. 1 second everyone is clapping. The next dash, a gallery of mannequins, frozen mid-celebration, like the entire world took a breath and forgot to exhale. The strangest part isn't the silence, it's the stillness. There's no tremble, no effort, no flicker. Even light seems paused, as if photons have been asked to wait. And in that pause, you feel something watching, not a presence exactly, more like an awareness that you've wandered off script, a pair of eyes behind the scene curtain, now forced to acknowledge you. You walk through the frozen people, you wave, you yell, you try to touch them, but your hand stops just short. Not from fear, from resistance, like touching a projection, paused on frame, and then, as suddenly as it stopped, Everything resumes. The bark finishes. The man steps down. The leaf hits the pavement. No one reacts. No one blinks. No one seems to notice that for a moment, time let go of its grip. But you felt it. The seam in the reel, the frame that stuttered. And now you begin to notice how often it happens. Not full freezes always. Sometimes it's subtler. A barista who forgets their line and stands motionless for 5 seconds before blinking back to life. A bus that idles without moving, even when the light turns green. A bird mid-flight that simply hovers too long before snapping forward. Sometimes it's more internal. You're in conversation. The other person goes blank. Their face holds the shape of listening, but nothing behind their eyes moves. You feel it again. That vacuum, that delay. And then life resumes. They laugh. They nod. They say, "Sorry, what were you saying?" You lie. You say, "Never mind." Because how could you explain what just happened? How could you say? The world paused, and I didn't, and now I can't trust the air around me. You begin to wonder who or what is pausing everything, and why. Why do you keep moving? You test it. You try to mimic the pause. You freeze mid-sentence, mid-bite, mid-blink. Nothing changes. The world continues. But the real pause, that other pause, returns only when you forget to expect it. That's how it works. It doesn't like being watched. So now you must train yourself to see without seeing, to watch the seams without letting the seams know. You're watching. You practice soft focus, peripheral noticing, letting your eyes drift just enough to catch when the light flickers for no reason. You develop a theory. That time is not a stream, but a series of posed frames, still images so rapid they appear alive. But once in a while, for some reason, one frame lingers too long, or the sequence hiccups, and you, somehow immune to the shudder, notice. You walk between the frames. You wonder, are these pauses malfunctions, or are they maintenance? A moment when the world recalibrates itself before continuing. A cosmic breath, held just long enough to straighten the stage. And if that's true, why do you get to witness it? You suspect it's not permission, it's accident, a timing error, a crack in the interface. That lets you glimpse the back end of the illusion. And now that you've seen it, it won't stop happening. You are being reminded again and again that reality is not continuous. It is choreographed. And sometimes the dancers rest, and you are not one of them. Or maybe you used to be, but something shifted. A step skipped, a beat mistimed, and now you move ahead while the world waits to catch up. It's not power, it's isolation. You laugh, but no one joins you. You cry, but the tears fall in a vacuum. The pause is beautiful. The pause is terrifying. Because each time it comes, you realize how much noise the world makes just to keep itself from falling silent. And in the silence, you hear it. Not words, not speech, but structure. You hear the lattice behind events, the scaffolding that holds cause and effect, just barely together. And it whispers, "You're not supposed to be here." But you are, moving when nothing else moves. breathing while the script resets, witnessing the invisible mechanism between seconds. You wonder, what would happen if you paused with it, if for once you stopped too? Would the world notice? Would it call you back? Would it collapse without someone to observe it? Or would it continue without you? Would your absence go unremarked? You try it. You wait for the next pause. And when it comes, you still yourself completely. You match the silence. You hold your breath. You surrender. And something shifts. For the briefest instant, you feel yourself outside the stage. Not the actor, not the audience, but the curtain. And beyond the curtain is not darkness, it is pattern, not in shapes, in stillness, a stillness that has always been there. Beneath the chaos, beneath the noise, beneath the illusion of motion, and then the world restarts. The people laugh, the dog barks, the bus drives on, and you, unpaused, carry the memory of that shared stillness like a secret, not something you explain, something you remember. A silence so complete, so alive, you begin to wonder if motion was ever real at all. It begins with someone else's memory of you, a story told secondhand, a laugh you weren't there to hear, a gesture borrowed from your spine, seen on someone else's body, in a place you've never been. They say, "I saw you in Madrid last fall." But you weren't in Madrid. You were at home, folding laundry, watching the light fade on your wall. They say, "You didn't recognize me, but it was you. Same walk, same face, same jacket you always wear." And part of you laughs, dismisses it, coincidence. But part of you, the part that wakes before the alarm, the part that feels watched in empty rooms, doesn't laugh at all. It listens, because it's not the first time. Someone else said they passed you on a train to Kyoto, that you were staring out the window, like you were waiting to dissolve. Another says they heard your voice on a podcast you've never recorded, a caller with your rhythm, your humor, your fear, and still, you were nowhere near. You begin to map the sightings, not obsessively, not yet. You draw pins on a world map, linking strings between cities, a constellation forming. In your absence, the pattern is messy but persistent. This other you appears just before you feel most lost. They're seen on the day you cancel your trip or leave your job or walk away from a relationship you thought you'd carry forever. Always they surface just behind the glass of a version of your life you didn't choose. And suddenly, you wonder if this doppelganger isn't a stranger at all. What if they are you, but from a slightly adjacent script? Not a clone, not a twin, but a reflection, caught walking. In the mirror you forgot to check. You try to track them. Not literally. You don't have photos, only stories, descriptions, so detailed. They feel like dreams you half remember. They always seem calm, more still, more sure. People say they seem at peace, or rehearsed, like someone playing the role of you, a little too perfectly. You think if it's an impersonator, they've studied well. But what if it isn't someone pretending? What if it's someone fulfilling? You begin to ask, What part of myself did I abandon that now walks the world without me? What decisions gave birth to this parallel? What versions of you fractured quietly off each time you said no to a yes that felt right? Each unchosen road had a walker. Each silence you swallowed birthed a voice elsewhere. Maybe the doppelganger is not a glitch. Maybe they're a reconciliation, a mirror held up to remind you that timelines don't disappear. They just drift. You catch glimpses in shop windows, a reflection delayed, a double shadow when the sun is low, a movement at the corner of your vision. That vanishes when you turn your head. You begin to feel like you're being followed, not by someone else, but by your own consequence, not guilt, not shame, just latency. You remember walking home one night and seeing someone across the street. With your posture, you couldn't see their face, but they moved, like someone who had never made your mistakes. You don't speak, you don't chase, you just watch them disappear into a city you suddenly don't recognize. You start dreaming of them. Not directly, you never see their face, but you feel it. That strange double awareness. You're sitting at a cafe you've never visited, ordering in a language you don't know, and the barista smiles, like they've seen you before. In the dream, you smile back, without hesitation. You wake up, with foreign coins in your coat pocket. You don't remember where the coat came from. You begin to suspect that the doppelganger is not only moving through the world, they are moving through you. Sometimes you say things in a cadence you've never used. Sometimes you have memories you didn't earn. A field of lavender, a night drive along a coast you've never touched. A name spoken with inexplicable grief. You look at your hands. You look at your handwriting. Sometimes they both feel borrowed. Not wrong, just secondhand. You start to ask, not, who is this other me, but what did I leave behind that needed to keep going? Maybe it was joy. Maybe it was risk. Maybe it was that one decision you didn't make that split a thread in the loom and spun another version into the world. And maybe that thread is now tugging back. You begin to write letters you don't send to the other you, the you that did, the you that went, the you that said yes where you said no. You start each one with, "Are you happier than I am?" And you never finish them. You just fold them and leave them on the windowsill as if a wind might carry them to wherever they're needed. You hear stories of others too, people who feel the same, who've seen their double step onto trains they themselves missed, who've seen their face in places their passport has never been. It doesn't frighten you anymore. It comforts you to know that somewhere, some version of you found another way through. To know that time is not linear, but branching, and that the self is not singular, but reflective. The doppelganger is not your opposite. They are your sibling, your echo, your traveler, walking the version of life you left unlived. You begin to think they see you too. That sometimes they look back in the same dreams, with the same coins, feeling the same tug from the other side of choice. And maybe, just maybe, you are their doppelganger. Maybe you are the one haunting their edges. Maybe you are the one, seen from across the street, familiar and slightly unreal. And one day, when the distance between you narrows, when the seams soften, you'll pass each other again, on some forgotten avenue, in some unnamed city. You won't speak, there won't be time, but your eyes will meet. And in that moment, no words, no recognition, just knowing, you will both smile, the same impossible smile, and you will both keep walking, back into your lives, back into your paths, carrying the warmth of a self remembered and never truly lost. Words are strange creatures. They leave your mouth and become strangers, but stranger still are the words that never left, the ones that echo, even though you never spoke them, the sentences that ring in someone else's voice, but where your rhythm, your inflection, your shape, someone quotes you, you pause because you never said that, not aloud, not to them, maybe not even to yourself, but it sounds like you. It feels like something you would have said, could have said, might say tomorrow, if the moment comes again. You shrug it off, but the air around you thickens. There's a vibration in it, the soft static of unsaid truths bouncing back from the walls. You begin to notice more of them. A thought appears in a friend's mouth, a second before you form it. A joke you were about to make lands from someone else's tongue. A line from your private journal echoes back through a stranger's caption. The timing is always too perfect to be random, too personal to be coincidence, and slowly, a question forms. Where do unspoken thoughts go? Do they vanish? Do they dissolve? Or do they echo, rippling outward in search of a host? Maybe words don't need to be said to live. Maybe language is a current, a signal, and your thoughts, when charged with enough emotion, slip loose and drift. You think of the moments you nearly confessed, the "I love you" caught in your teeth, the apology stifled by pride, the scream pressed into a pillow, the goodbye swallowed like a pill. You never said them, but they were loud, inside, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the unsaid doesn't disappear. Maybe it waits, gathers, a storm of syllables hovering just beyond hearing, waiting for cracks in the fabric of conversation, waiting for the right throat to borrow. You begin to feel haunted, not by ghosts, but by your own potential, by all the versions of you that might have been if you'd spoken differently. And sometimes you hear them, and the voices of others, mid-sentence, a phrase that hits too hard, a whisper, too aligned, a stranger in line, saying exactly what you wrote, in the letter you never sent. You wonder, what if thought is not private? What if silence is not a seal? What if your mind leaks? You test it. You sit in a room and think a sentence over and over, simple, clear, anchored in emotion. You wait, and someone nearby mentions it, not word for word, but close, uncomfortably close. You feel it again, that quiet thrill, that fear. You are being heard. Without speaking, you remember that science has names for it: cryptomnesia, shared cognition, subconscious suggestion. But those labels are just the attempt to bottle something, too wide for shelves, because this isn't memory, it's reverberation. Thoughts don't die, they resonate, especially the ones with heat, especially the ones we're afraid to voice. They find the cracks, the open mouths, the dreams of others. You start dreaming of conversations you've never had, but wake up changed. As if you did, you remember the answers to questions you never asked. You hear someone accuse you of words you never used, and part of you feels guilty because deep down you know you thought them. Once sharply in anger or shame or sorrow, and somehow that thought made its way into the world anyway. Not as a lie, as a presence. You begin to fear your silence, not because it's empty, but because it's porous. A membrane, not a wall. You become careful with your thoughts. You hold them gently, you cradle them, like live wires, because now you understand. What you think may find a voice elsewhere. The mind is not a cage, it is a transmitter, and some frequencies travel farther than you can imagine. A childhood friend calls, mentions a story you don't remember telling. You didn't tell it. You only replayed it obsessively in the days before they called. They laugh, say you always used to say that, but you never did, not out loud. The story lives, so does the version of you who told it. And you start to ask, how many versions of me exist in other people's minds, built from thoughts I never released but still escaped? You become a collector of echoes. You listen for your voice in foreign mouths. You read between the lines for the shape of your silences. You discover fragments of yourself, embedded in places you've never been. You read a poem. That feels like a memory. You hear a lyric that finishes a sentence you began in your sleep. It no longer feels like coincidence. It feels like leakage. Your unspoken self has scattered and is finding ways to come home. You wonder, what is language really? Not just sound, not just grammar, but an ecosystem, a network of pulses woven through time, a dream of shared meaning, where thought is never fully owned, only passed. And the echoes, they don't stop. You hear them in children, in strangers, in the radio static between songs. Sometimes they arrive distorted, bent, out of order. But you know your own patterns, your own cadences, your emotional fingerprints. And when the echo returns, you know it. You close your eyes and listen, not to the voice in your head, but to the voice around you, the one repeating everything you never said, but always meant. And suddenly you are not alone. In your silence, the world speaks you back into itself, and for a moment, you are heard completely, even without sound, even without speech. You are present in the pulse of the unseen, your truth circling back in borrowed breath. You're talking to a friend, to a stranger, to someone you know well or not at all. And then it happens. A pause, a phrase, a flick of tone, and suddenly you're back. Not just to the beginning of the sentence, but to the beginning of something older, something deeper. You've had this conversation before. Same setting, same words, same emotional weather, hanging between the syllables. You say nothing. You try to ignore it. But the lines repeat, the timing matches, the cadence feels rehearsed. And for a moment, the illusion of spontaneity cracks. You know what they're about to say. Not because you've heard it, but because the script is looping. You smile too soon. You nod before the question lands. And inside, something begins to unravel. You check the context. Different clothes, different day. But still, this is not the first time. You've stood in this sentence. You remember déjà vu. But this isn't that. This isn't a flicker. This is a full reel. Running again. You lean forward, testing the moment. You alter a word. You interrupt earlier than last time. They falter, slightly like an actor off cue. But they recover, and the conversation veers back to its inevitable path, like water down a carved channel, like fate with a favorite line. You think, maybe it's memory, maybe I dreamed this once, but no. You feel the echo. It lives in your jaw, in the air between your bodies, in the faint delay. Before sound becomes sound, you hear yourself respond. And it's the same response you gave last time. Down to the exact hesitation, you stop. Mid-thought, mid-gesture, the world holds its breath. Have I said all of this before? Not just this conversation, but all of it. The day, the choices, the waiting email, the meal you're about to eat. How far back does the loop go? What if it isn't just a moment repeating, but your whole life? What if this is not déjà vu, but déjà vécu, the already lived? You look around. Nothing seems artificial, but everything seems placed. The light falls just so. The cup on the table tilts. At the perfect, unremarkable angle. The background noise feels like ambient fiction playing on the loop, designed to comfort you. You begin to wonder, am I the only one who notices? You test it. You drop a word you've never used before. You change the order of your sentence, and just for a moment, the other person blinks. There's a flicker of confusion, a reset. Then they nod, and the loop resumes. That's when you realize this isn't a memory repeating. It's a mechanism, a program, re-executing itself, because the last iteration didn't conclude properly. You begin to suspect that conversations aren't always exchanges. Sometimes they are patterns, instructions, loops of logic meant to contain you. You replay that one recurring talk, the one about the future, or your family, or the job you almost took. It's always the same. No matter how much you try to shift it, you end up saying the same words, in the same way. Even your questions are choreographed. You try to exit, you try to leap free from the sentence before it lands. But language is sticky. It pulls you back in. A single misstep and the loop resets. You say, I feel like we've talked about this before. They smile. They say, yeah, funny, right? But there's a weight behind their eyes, a flicker, like they too are remembering, but don't want to admit it. You think, what happens if I don't respond? What happens if I let the moment die? Before the loop completes, you try it. Silence. The other person waits. Still, like an audio file paused, mid-playback. You feel it then. The edge of the loop the rim of something larger, a track you've been walking again and again. Maybe this conversation is not just stuck. Maybe you are. Maybe you're cycling through a pocket of time that's trying to resolve something. Left incomplete, you replay the variables. What didn't get said? What truth keeps circling, unsaid, unsurfaced? Maybe the loop will continue until you admit the thing you've refused to confront. Maybe it's not about escaping the pattern, but completing the pattern. So you lean in, you say what you've never said, you let the unspeakable rise. The moment shudders, the words land, unscripted, raw, and for the first time, the other person doesn't respond on cue. They breathe, they blink, they change, and the loop breaks. The room shifts, everything feels the same, but nothing repeats. You feel it in your body, a release, as if something uncoiled inside your ribs. You wonder how many of your conversations were loops waiting to be completed. How many times have you said the same things to the same people under different skies? What if your life isn't linear, but cyclical, and your speech is not spontaneous, but recursive? You start to listen differently. You notice the cadence of repeated patterns, and how are you rarely means how are you, but rather begin the sequence. How I'm fine is not an answer, but a key to the next line in the script. You begin to edit the sequence, one pause at a time, one unspoken confession, one question asked, not out of habit, but curiosity. And slowly the loops fray, break, open. New language begins to emerge, not just different words, but different meanings. The conversations become less like circles and more like rivers, uncertain, messy, alive. You no longer fear repetition, because now you know what it means. A loop is not a prison, it is a signal, a place where time gathers to ask, are you ready to move on? And when you are, when you finally are, the sentence unfolds into something you've never heard before, something true. No one told you how to be. There was no manual, no envelope slipped under the door, no message scratched into the wall. When the lights first came on, you simply arrived, conscious, spinning, waking into a world already in motion. Everyone else seemed to know what to do, how to sit, when to speak, why to cry. You tried to mimic, you watched carefully. You learned when to laugh, how to lower your voice, where to look when someone asked a question you didn't know how to answer. But deep inside, beneath the manners, beneath the pacing of polite conversation, there was always a question. You didn't know how to form, what am I supposed to be doing here? Not just in this room, in this life. You assumed someone would tell you. Eventually, a mentor, a book, a stranger on a bus whose accidental words would click something into place, but they didn't. So you improvised. You made decisions, like sketches. You constructed your personality, like a mask you hoped would fit better with time. You carried on, like someone walking in the dark, through a house they were told once belonged to them. And still, no instructions came, but something else did. Moments, small ones, Strange ones, moments when your hands knew what to do. Before your brain caught up, you reached for the falling glass. Before it broke, you said the exact sentence. That soothed someone's panic. Without thinking, you walked into a room you'd never entered and turned the right corner. On the first try, instinct, muscle memory. For muscles you don't remember training. You paused, felt the weight of it. How could you know something you were never taught? Where did that knowledge live before it surfaced? You started to pay attention to the silent nudges, the movements that felt rehearsed, the way your body sometimes leaned toward things before your logic allowed it. You'd write a sentence in a style you never studied. You'd speak a word you didn't know you knew. You'd hum a melody you couldn't place, but felt somehow responsible for. And for a moment, you'd feel like a character, carrying out instructions. They were never shown, but always contained. It didn't feel like memory. It felt like inheritance, like something woven into your blood. Before your name was chosen, you started to see it elsewhere. Children solving problems no one had explained, animals migrating across continents to places they had never seen, dreams warning you before events had time to unfold. And you began to wonder, what if the instructions are not written outside you, but inside? What if the operating system is embedded? What if your confusion comes only from looking outward for what was designed to be read inward? You thought you were waiting for a sign, but maybe the sign was always waiting for you to stop searching and start listening, not to the world, to the silence beneath your thoughts, that still, coded silence that whispers you already know. Not everything, not yet, but enough to take the next step without knowing the whole road, enough to reach out without needing permission, enough to begin even when nothing is finished. You remember moments when your life changed in a single breath, not because of a plan, but because of a knowing. You walked away. You said yes. You turned around at the last second, and everything realigned. How did you know? There were no instructions, only alignment, only the quiet confirmation that the motion you made belonged. You begin to trust it more. The impulse to speak, the decision to leave, the pause before signing. Not all instincts are true, but some are more accurate than your most rational thoughts. And they never argue, they don't shout, they don't push, they offer. Then wait, and if you don't listen, they don't punish. They simply return later in a different form. A song lyric, a stranger's offhand remark, a flicker in a dream. You don't understand until it becomes memory. You begin to keep track, not of what you're taught, but of what you recognize. That quiet moment when you encounter something for the first time and feel like you've come home. That book you pick up in a shop you almost didn't enter, only to find a sentence that explains something you've never told anyone. That place you traveled to on a whim and feel your bones soften like they remember the earth. Recognition is not nostalgia. It's resonance. It's the blueprint humming in your fingertips. You were not given instructions. You are the instruction. You were never meant to be told. You were meant to unfold. Each day, a soft decoding, each choice, a whisper answered. You stop asking for a map, you start walking. And the path, unseen a moment ago, forms beneath your step, because maybe the world doesn't reveal itself to those who wait to be shown. Maybe it answers only those brave enough to move. Before understanding, you think of birds flying thousands of miles without direction, of seeds splitting in soil. They did not choose, nothing told them. And yet, they knew, so do you. You've just forgotten how to trust the silence, the part of you that acts with integrity before logic catches up, the part that says, "This is mine," without needing proof. You begin to understand you are not here to be instructed. You are here to remember what you were already born knowing, to reclaim the map hidden in your marrow, and in doing so you become the signal for someone else, a reminder, a reflection, a spark, because the ones who walk without knowing are often the ones who awaken what's been forgotten. You were not given instructions because you didn't need them. You are the instructions. Someone else is waiting to remember. At first, it was just a dream, a flicker of a hallway you didn't recognize, a stranger speaking your name in a voice that wasn't familiar, but somehow felt earned. You woke and it faded, as dreams do. But then, 2 days later, you were walking down a hallway you'd never seen, and the walls tilted at the exact angle you remembered. Someone's voice behind you, your name, not a coincidence, not anymore. You started writing them down. Not all of them, just the ones that left something behind, a texture, a sentence, a sense of inevitability. The dream where your teeth fell out meant nothing, but the dream where the phone rang, before it actually did, that one stayed. The dream where your friend confessed something they'd never said. You laughed it off, until the confession came days later, word for word. You began to track the lag. How long between dream and replication? Sometimes hours, sometimes months. The future didn't arrive in order, but it arrived. You thought, am I dreaming the future, or am I remembering it? And what is the difference when time folds like paper and thoughts seep backward as easily as forward? You told no one. It sounded impossible, even to you. But still the dream came, the same one, over and over, a room, a flickering light, a sound, metallic, rhythmic, the feeling of something waiting, just around the corner. You had never been there, not yet, but you knew you would be. The dream was not symbolic, it was architectural. It was mapping you, and you began to wonder, are dreams just echoes from another direction? Not illusions, but dispatches from elsewhere on the track. Not metaphor, but memory traveling through a medium that does not obey the clock. You recall the dream where you dropped your keys just before the train doors closed. And then it happened. Same spot, same sound, same rush of breath. You didn't feel surprised. You felt recognized, as if the moment itself had been waiting for you to arrive. You ask yourself, am I shaping reality by dreaming it, or am I only noticing the parts of life that fit the forecast? You test it. You try to dream something specific, a red balloon, a word on a stranger's shirt, a number on a receipt. And then, one by one, they come. Not all at once, not always where expected, but they come. It no longer feels like guessing. It feels like alignment. The dreams are not fiction. They are drafts, first runs, soft blueprints for scenes that will later solidify. And when they do, you begin to see the seams. You begin to feel the edges of the present becoming porous. A conversation slips. You anticipate a response before it's said. And not because you know the person, but because you dreamed them. You remember gestures before they happen, laughs before they land, arguments that feel like reruns on a channel you didn't subscribe to. You question your own authorship. Am I dreaming the world into being, or is someone else leaking the script into my sleep? Sometimes the dreams arrive with urgency, a warning, a feeling, a sharpness in the chest. That doesn't fade with daylight. You avoid the road. You skip the call. You stay home. And nothing happens. But the nothing feels like a confirmation, like something almost reached you and missed. You begin to trust it, not because it's always right, but because it's always true. There's a difference. Truth is not prediction. It is pattern. And the dreams are patterned. They know your rhythm, your thresholds, your wounds. They send messages in metaphor only when directness would break you. You dream of water when what you're drowning in can't be named. You dream of clocks when your time is shifting underneath your feet. You dream of doors when something is about to end or begin, and always, when the dream comes again, it brings a peace. You missed the first time. It's recursive, cumulative. The dream is not a visitor. It's an archive, a living record of your slow emergence into what you are becoming. And sometimes it outruns you. You meet someone and feel the snap of recognition. Not their face, not their voice, but the moment. This was a dream. You see it all. The gestures, the posture, the sentence they haven't said yet. And when they say it, you nod. Not with surprise, but with memory. They look at you like they've known you longer than is reasonable. And maybe they have. Maybe they dreamed you too. You ask yourself, how many of your memories started as dreams? How many dreams were not dreams at all, but arrivals? You think of the house you drew as a child and walked into 20 years later. You think of the name you whispered once in sleep and then married. You think of the accident you swerved from for no good reason, except that the night before you dreamed you couldn't breathe. The dreams are not magic. They are not prophecy. They are proximity, the mind touching edges. Before the rest of you arrives, they are moments folding in on themselves like time blinking sideways. They are signals, soft and strange, but consistent. You don't need to believe in them. You only need to listen, because the dream does not ask for faith, only attention. And when you give it, when you take the symbols seriously, without demanding logic, something opens, a subtle corridor, a spiral staircase, a door that swings both ways. You begin to live in both directions, forward, into the unfolding, backward, into the blueprint. You sleep, not to escape, but to return to the architect's table, and you wake, not to forget, but to build what was drawn in darkness. You remember it clearly, the hallway with green carpet, the humming refrigerator, the shadow in the corner that always seemed to move just after you looked away. You remember it, except no one else does. Your mother says the carpet was brown. There was no hallway, no refrigerator that made noise, no shadow, certainly. But you know what you remember. You can still feel the texture of that carpet beneath your bare feet, still see the way the light hit the floor. At 3:12 p.m., as if it had been rehearsed, you start to notice other things. Tiny inconsistencies, a favorite toy that doesn't exist, a family photo where you're missing, even though you know you were there, an uncle who tells a story you know ended differently. You smile politely, you don't argue, but the room inside your memory grows colder. Something doesn't match. Not memory loss, something stranger, a distortion, a splice. You begin to suspect your childhood has been edited, not erased, not forgotten, but modified. Just enough to cause friction. The memory is still there, but it doesn't fit, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong picture. You remember the playground with the blue tunnel slide, but the slide was yellow. You remember the teacher with the red glasses, but no one else does. You even checked your old school yearbook. No glasses, no slide. You wonder, did I invent these memories, or were they replaced? You recall something you once read, that memory is fallible, that each time you remember something, you rewrite it, edit it, repaint it with newer brushes. But this doesn't feel like that. This feels external, like someone else redrafted the script while you were asleep. You dream of places you've never visited, but that feel like home. You describe them to your parents. A yellow room, a staircase with 5 steps, a closet that opened to another room. They shake their heads. You ask, was there ever a time we lived somewhere else? They say no, but something in their voice quivers. You begin to keep a list of all the things you remember that no one else does. The cereal box mascot with a missing tooth, a neighbor who vanished without anyone seeming to notice, the friend you swore was real, but whose name eludes everyone now. You look through old journals, drawings, notes. Sometimes the proof is there. A crude sketch of the toy that never existed, a journal entry about the dog your family says you never had. Other times there's nothing, just silence, where a memory should be. You begin to wonder how much of your childhood was real, not in the emotional sense, but structurally, spatially, chronologically. What if time in childhood it is not a line, but a spiral? What if you looped? What if something rewound you, reset you? What if you lived versions of certain moments more than once? The birthday party with the balloons that popped before the cake arrived. You swear that happened twice, but the photographs only show one, and the balloon colors don't match. You speak to others, ask quietly, cautiously. They laugh until they don't, until someone else says, "I remember a door in my childhood home that led to a room we weren't allowed to enter. But now there's no door at all." Someone else remembers. An older sibling no one else recalls. Someone else still knows a lullaby their parents claim they never sang. The room grows heavy with unsynced timelines, and then you begin to dream of your childhood home, but it's different. The wallpaper has symbols you don't recognize. There's a staircase where no staircase belonged, a figure in the backyard who never turns around. You wake, with the dream still clinging to your skin. You tell yourself it's just your imagination. But then you visit the house. Years later, different owners. You walk through the rooms. You try not to disturb anything. But something's off. The hallway is shorter. The window is smaller. The light doesn't fall the way you remember. You ask the owners about renovations. They say it's always been this way. You thank them. You leave, but the dissonance hums louder now. You begin to feel that your childhood exists in more than one version, one remembered, one recorded, and the space between them is not memory loss, it's interference. You ask yourself, why would someone edit a childhood? Not someone, something. Time, chance, the collective need to agree on a version of the past. Even if it isn't yours, you begin to understand. That childhood is elastic, and reality, especially for the young, isn't fixed. It's narrative, a story told and retold until it hardens into truth. But what if you remember the draft version, the earlier edit, the timeline before the revisions? And what if certain memories refuse to be rewritten? They don't vanish. They glitch. A room too big, a conversation that shouldn't exist, a recurring number on a birthday cake. That contradicts the year. You once told someone you felt like you'd been here before. They laughed, said all kids feel that way, but it never stopped. Not for you, you still feel it. The lag, the loop, the parts of childhood that feel like borrowed footage from another reel. You begin to accept that your memory may not match the world's, and maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's a doorway. Maybe those glitches aren't mistakes, they're markers, proof that your timeline has been stitched, looped, folded, and you are still carrying the evidence in the form of a room that doesn't exist, in the form of a toy that vanished from the shelves, in the form of a voice you remember clearly. Though no one will claim it, you stop trying to correct your memories. You let them stand, not because they're provable, but because they're yours. And perhaps somewhere in that crack between reality and recollection, the truth hums quietly, waiting to be remembered in full. You're in a familiar place, your room, your office, your quiet corner of somewhere ordinary. You've been here 100 times. Nothing changes. Until it does, you notice it in passing, a detail out of place, subtle, unsettling, a button on a wall A panel, a surface that's never had one, a circle the size of a coin. Flat, clean, waiting. You stare, confused but not alarmed. You reach for memory, but it offers no anchor. You've touched this wall before, pressed against it, searched for switches, but there was nothing. Now, there is. The button doesn't blink, doesn't hum, just sits there like it's always been part of the landscape. And the worst part is, you believe it. For a moment, your mind begins to rewrite itself. Maybe it was always there, maybe you never noticed. But deep down, beneath the layers of daily forgetfulness, you know better. It wasn't there yesterday. You try not to touch it. You tell yourself it's not important, that you imagined it, but it's designed for pressing. And eventually, you press, click, software too soft, and then nothing. No beep, no spark, no shift in the air. Just the room, unchanged. You let out a breath. You move on. But the next morning, something feels different. You wake up seconds before the alarm. You reach for your phone and find it already in your hand. The coffee tastes sharper. The silence feels arranged. You walk past the wall again, and the button is gone. Gone. No trace, no outline, just smooth surface, where yesterday a possibility had been. And now you feel it everywhere, like a splinter in the fabric of the day, a glitch in the stitching. That leaves no tear, but tingles where it used to be. You ask yourself, what did the button do? Did it activate something? Deactivate something? Or worse, did it simply notify something? That you were ready? You begin to notice more of them, not every day, not everywhere, but often enough to unravel your sense of permanence. Elevators with an extra floor, remote controls with unmarked keys, bathroom mirrors with hairline seams that weren't there before. You pressed them out of curiosity, out of compulsion, and always something shifts, not loudly, not immediately, but undeniably. A phone number you remember is now one digit off. Your favorite cafe now spells your name right. Without asking, a friend finishes your sentence before you speak. These aren't accidents, these are adjustments, tiny, deliberate recalibrations that ripple backward. Reality re-editing itself in response to your interference. You start to wonder how many buttons you've pressed without realizing, how many times you've changed the channel without knowing you had the remote. Maybe not all buttons are physical. Maybe some are decisions, questions asked, paths taken. Maybe every moment is a panel, every gesture a lever. You think about dreams. How sometimes you find yourself in a corridor with a button glowing on the wall. You press it, you always press it, and then wake, feeling like something has been reset. A mood, a memory, a momentum. You ask yourself, what are these buttons connected to? A system, a sequence, a you, in another layer of the world. You picture it, a great invisible console, with your name etched into the metal, a grid of switches, half labeled, half forgotten. And somewhere, a version of you sits with their hand, hovering, deciding, not whether to press, but when. Maybe it's not about cause and effect, maybe it's about readiness, maybe the button doesn't do anything, until you're the kind of person who presses it. And the act of pressing isn't the trigger, but the threshold. You think back to the moment you first saw the button. What were you thinking? What were you willing? A change, a break, a release, and the world answered. Not with fireworks, but with rearrangement, as if to say, "We heard you, but softly." You begin to imagine that reality is filled with buttons, invisible until acknowledged, dormant until believed in, each one placed at the exact moment you're ready to question why it wasn't there before. You wonder how many you've missed, how many possibilities faded back into nothing because you blinked instead of noticing, and worse, how many you saw but didn't trust. What if opportunity doesn't knock but glows quietly on the wall until ignored long enough to vanish? You begin to walk slower, scan your surroundings, not obsessively but reverently, because the world might be hiding in plain sight, and the next button may not look like a button at all. It may be a sentence, a stranger's gaze, a missed call from a number you almost recognized. It may be a feeling you can't explain, a sense of pressure just beneath the skin, a tug towards something you didn't plan to explore. You begin to keep a list, not of buttons, but of moments that felt like buttons, moments that presented a choice that didn't look like one until after you made it, moments you can't explain, but that changed everything. You stop asking, what would have happened if you hadn't pressed? Because the truth is, you did, and now you're living in the echo, each version of you separated by a single push of the unknown, and now you know reality responds, not to logic, not to ritual, but to curiosity. It bends when questioned, it shifts when noticed, it reveals when trusted. And somewhere just beyond this moment, in a room you've passed 100 times, a new button waits, not to change the world, but to show you that it always could. You see them on the street, a flash of recognition, a tilt of the head, a narrowing of the eyes. You know them, not from a photograph, not from a party or a chance encounter. You know them in the way you know how your own name feels when someone says it right. But you don't know why. Your mind begins to search. You rewind through years, places, timelines, a cafe, a classroom, a dream. Nothing clicks, but the certainty grows stronger. You know this face. Their eyes hold your name. Their posture mirrors something in you that never quite made it to the surface. They walk past. Maybe they glance back. Maybe not, but either way, you are left with the weight of a meeting that did not happen. You tell yourself it was nothing. You move on until it happens again. A different face, different place, but the same sensation, the same jolt of familiarity, without the scaffolding of memory. It keeps happening. People who feel like déjà vu. With skin, they look at you like you've already disappointed them once, or like they forgave you long before you had the chance to ask. You begin to wonder, are these people from a forgotten chapter, or from a story you haven't lived yet? Maybe memory isn't linear. Maybe it's proximity. And these faces, they're echoes from lives lived adjacent to yours. They didn't cross your path. They touched it, brushed its edge, in a moment just shy of contact. And that's all it took for the imprint to remain. You start to catalog them, not with names. You don't have those. With impressions. The woman at the train station whose face held the exact grief you felt in high school, before you had words for it. The man in the cafe who looked up from his coffee with eyes that said, "You never called back." But you never had his number. You never even spoke. You wonder if you're being followed by versions of your own self, worn by others. If these faces are masks for emotions you've tried to outrun. Or maybe they're not reflections. They're constants, anchors, placed in your path to remind you that not all recognition comes from memory. Some comes from resonance. Some comes from elsewhere. You recall dreams where strangers wept in your arms, where hands you didn't know grasped yours with the intensity of lost decades. You woke feeling love for people who don't exist. But now, you wonder if they do, if these people in the street, in the lobby, at the crosswalk, are dream fragments made flesh, carriers of unresolved chapters, actors from scenes that were rehearsed but never filmed. And when you see them, it's not nostalgia. It's a timeline waving, a thread you didn't pull tight enough. You ask yourself, what happens to people we almost meet? Do they vanish, or do they stay near, orbiting your narrative in case you change your mind? Maybe these familiar faces are the ones who would have mattered if things had tilted a fraction, if the line you didn't say had landed, if the invitation you hesitated to send had found its way. You wonder how many stories you are the familiar face in, how many people feel a chill when you walk by, not from fear, but from recognition. Without explanation, you once passed a man who stared at you like you were a ghost. He forgot he buried. He didn't speak. He just blinked, as if remembering a version of you that belonged elsewhere. And maybe that's what this is. Not a haunting, but a proximity alert. Souls brushing across timelines, lives nearly shared. The universe's version of a reminder. You could have loved this person. You almost did. You begin to greet them in your head. Silently, kindly. Hello again. I'm sorry we missed each other. Thank you for showing up anyway. You stop asking who they are. You start asking what part of you they represent. The woman in the bookstore feels like closure. The child on the sidewalk feels like a decision you never made. The old man on the bench feels like forgiveness you never requested but needed all the same. You realize that memory is not the only source of knowing. There's a knowledge older than experience, a recognition that lives below the facts. These people don't need to be remembered to matter. They arrive as reminders that time is more generous than it appears, that the past isn't gone, just folded, and sometimes it creases in a way that lets two versions of you look across the seam and say, I see you. Not fully, not finally, but enough. You stop needing to explain it. You let the moment pass like a wind through curtains, a softness that says, even if we never meet again, you still existed in me. And maybe that's all we are, familiar faces to someone else, a brush with the parallel, a spark from the almost, a cameo in a story. That didn't make the final draft, but still echoes in the background score. So the next time you see one, don't chase, don't cling, just notice, and in your heart nod. Because in another life you might have shared a name, or a home, or a moment. And in this one you shared a recognition, which is a kind of love too. There are moments when your mouth moves before you mean it to. Words fall out, clean and practiced. But you weren't there to send them. You catch up a half-second later, chasing the tail end of a sentence you supposedly authored, a joke you didn't think of, a phrase you didn't shape, a confession that skipped past the gate and landed on the table. Before you knew it was yours. It's a strange delay, a lag, like speaking on a bad connection. But the signal is between you and yourself. Other times it's the reverse. You have the thought, clear as crystal. You hear the words in your mind, ready to release. And nothing happens. The voice stutters. Your tongue forgets the choreography. The sentence jams like an elevator between floors. You wonder who's in control here. Is the self that thinks the same as the self that speaks? Or is there a space between them, thin but vital, where things get lost? You begin to notice it everywhere, the way your body moves, on autopilot, but your mind watches like a passenger. Who didn't pay the fare? The way you nod in agreement to something you don't understand and smile like you meant it, though your mind is 3 seconds behind, trying to piece together the premise. You feel unaligned, out of sync, not broken, just asynchronous, like a film reel whose soundtrack slipped one frame too slow. And in that space between thought and voice, something else stirs, a presence, a subtle shadow of selfhood, a third thing. Not the thought, not the speaker, but the one observing both. You begin to wonder if this is how consciousness always worked, not as a single stream, but as layers, a nested system of intention, translation, expression, each layer with its own delay, each step a chance for error or transformation. Maybe the thought you think is not the one that arrives. Maybe it gets dressed in words it didn't choose before stepping out into the world. Maybe that's why you sometimes feel estranged from your own statements, like reading a transcript of a conversation you don't recall having. You start to slow down, not in speech, in listening to yourself. You notice the space between the decision to speak and the sound that follows. It's microscopic, but undeniable, and sometimes something slips through. You say something that reveals more than you intended. Not a mistake, a revelation. The voice outpaces the mask, and what emerges is more honest than what you would have chosen. You wonder, is the lag a flaw or a feature? What if that delay is where truth lives? What if that half-second is the only space where the deeper self has a chance to intervene? You recall moments when you almost said something, That would have changed everything. But you didn't. You paused, or stammered, or forgot the words. And something inside you whispered, "Not now." Was that fear, or was that guidance? Who edits the thoughts before they become speech? And who decides when to let them through? You begin to sense that you are not a single voice, but a chamber, a resonance box through which multiple signals pass. Some come from logic, some from emotion, some from memory, but some come from somewhere else. Some rise up before they are born. You've felt it when you speak a sentence that surprises you, when you give advice you didn't know you believed, when you say, "I don't know where that came from," but you do. It came from the lag, from that electric space where selfhood blinks and lets something else in. Maybe that's why silence feels so heavy, because it stretches the space between thought and voice to its maximum width. And in that gap, everything reveals itself: desire, doubt, grief, vision. You begin to treat silence not as emptiness, but as the place where raw thought waits to be chosen. You speak less, but with more certainty. You listen more, not just to others, to yourself. You catch the delay. You sit with it. You ask, "What am I about to say? And why?" And in that pause, sometimes the words fall away, revealing what you actually meant, what you actually feared, what you actually needed. Not always beautiful, but always honest. The delay becomes your mirror, and you begin to love it. The stumble, the hesitation, the breath before the truth. It's not weakness, it's a doorway. It's the moment your performance gets interrupted by your presence and you step forward. Not as the polished speaker, but as the real one. You recall the times your voice cracked, and it mattered more. The times you said, "I don't know," and something inside you exhaled for the first time. You wonder how much of your life you've spent trying to keep up with your own performance, and what would happen if you stopped racing your voice, if you let the lag lead, if you allowed thought to take its time, crossing the bridge to your mouth. What would arrive? What might be lost? And what, in the silence between them, might finally be found? You walk in, a doorway you've passed 100 times, maybe a meeting room, a classroom, a stranger's apartment. Nothing unfamiliar, nothing suspicious, but something is off. The air feels staged, arranged, like it was anticipating your entrance. Someone smiles, someone nods, someone makes a comment. That lands too perfectly. The rhythm of the moment snaps into place, like a line of dialogue. Read from a page. You laugh, but the laugh feels timed. You sit, but it feels blocked, not chosen. You begin to notice how every chair faces the right direction, how the lighting flatters everyone equally, how the coffee cup you didn't remember placing is already in your hand. You tell yourself it's nothing. Coincidence, familiarity, but the feeling grows louder. This room, this moment has been rehearsed, not by you, but around you. You try to disrupt it, say something offbeat, change the tempo, create a ripple, but the others don't flinch. They adjust, like seasoned actors handling a missed cue with grace. And suddenly you realize they've done this before. Not just this moment, this version of you. They know your timing, your gestures, your doubts, and they are here to guide you through the scene without letting you realize. You've forgotten your lines. You look at their faces, too calm, too prepared. They speak in phrases that answer questions you haven't asked yet. You sip your drink, and it tastes like a decision you didn't make. The walls feel closer now. The ceiling hums with quiet attention, not mechanical, not ambient, intentional, as if something is watching. Not with malice, but with curiosity. You are the variable in this scene. Everything else has already been choreographed. You begin to play along. Not to belong, but to observe. You echo their energy. You mimic the script. You nod at the right places and smile when expected. But underneath, you are dismantling. One sentence at a time. You test the edges of the scene. You ask an off-topic question. Mention a memory you've never shared. Someone pauses, only slightly, and then they recover. The script recalibrates. You feel it happen like a GPS, rerouting your detour. Without your consent, you say something absurd. The others laugh. But their laughter is delayed, one beat too late, as if they had to check the margins first. The room remains calm, but the performance has cracked. You think, what happens if I walk out now? What if you left mid-line? What if you refused to end the scene? Would the world wait? Would they freeze until you returned? Or would another actor take your place? You begin to suspect. This is not the only room. There are others. Everywhere. Rooms arranged, not for aesthetics, but for narrative. Each one built to contain a specific version of you, each one holding a scene that must be completed before you're allowed to continue. You think of moments in your life that felt too cinematic, the breakup in the rain, the apology with perfect lighting, the chance encounter that spoke in metaphor. You thought it was coincidence. You thought it was meaning. What if it was set design? What if someone, or something, has been staging your emotional arcs like tableaus, and your job was simply to hit your mark? You begin to notice it elsewhere, in the framing of windows, in the timing of footsteps, in how arguments climax at the precise moment the kettle whistles. You begin to question your memories. Were they lived, or were they directed? You revisit your past with a new lens. That moment in childhood, when you found a key and never knew what it opened. That summer day, when a stranger said the exact words you needed to hear. That late-night walk, when the streetlights flickered, in sync with your doubt. These weren't memories, they were scenes, and you were both actor and audience. You feel dizzy. The ground feels metaphorical. You touch the table beside you, solid but placed. You ask aloud, "What is this?" And someone answers, "That's a great question." Too smoothly, too quickly. You turn toward them, but they're already moving on, already guiding the conversation back to safety. You realize then they cannot break character. not without breaking the room, and the room must stay intact, because it is not just structure, it is logic. If the scene fails, the logic frays, and behind the logic is the unknown. You don't fear it, not anymore. You are tired of being scripted. You want to speak. Without knowing the next line, you want to stand in a room that doesn't respond, like a well-trained algorithm. You rise from the chair. The others pause, just for a breath. Then they smile, as if the moment has arrived, as if this was part of the script all along. But you know the difference now. You walk to the door. It opens. No resistance, no alarms, just a hallway you've never seen. No paint on the walls, no set dressing, no cues, just space. Unwritten, unrehearsed. You step into it, not with certainty, not with grace, but with freedom. And as the room fades behind you, you hear a voice, your own, not quite aloud, saying, "The script ends here. Now begin." It starts with a feeling, not heavy, not urgent, just present. You feel it walking home, in the stillness between footfalls, in the silence that wraps itself around street corners. Something is aware of you, not a person, not a camera, not the gaze of a stranger. It's bigger, older, slower. It isn't watching you from a window, it's watching through the window, through the sky, through the patterns in your coffee foam, and the timing of every red light. It's watching you from beneath the seams, not with eyes, with presence. You brush it off, you rationalize, but the feeling returns, not louder but deeper, like a bass note vibrating inside of your decisions. You step into a bookstore. The exact page you needed falls open, not a coincidence, not this time. You look up, not at anything, just up. And the feeling sharpens, like something saw you, recognized the pattern, and blinked. Slowly, patiently, you begin to sense that there's an awareness woven into the fabric of your life, not controlling, not interfering, just there, like the background hum. You only notice once it stops. You start to test it. You speak questions aloud. With no one in the room, you whisper your fears into pillowcases. You ask for signs with half a smile. And sometimes you get them, a song lyric that finishes your thought, a stranger wearing your grandfather's cologne, a power outage, just when you needed to pause. The more you notice, the more it responds. Not always clearly, not always immediately, but consistently. It doesn't answer your questions so much as reflect them. It doesn't speak in language, it speaks in mirrors. You begin to understand. This isn't surveillance. This isn't punishment. This is witness. The universe is watching. Not because you are important, but because you are here. Because to exist is to be seen, and being seen changes everything. You remember science. The observer effect. That particles behave differently when watched. That light chooses its path based on expectation. That matter performs. For perception, you wonder if the universe behaves differently because it knows you're watching. What does it do when it watches you? You begin to live like someone being observed. by something that cannot be fooled, not judged, just understood. Entirely, it changes your choices, not because you fear being caught, but because you desire to be honest, to be legible, to something vast. You begin to walk slower, speak softer, choose more deliberately. You start thanking the wind. When it arrives at the perfect moment, you nod at the full moon, like it arranged itself for you. You leave empty chairs at your table for the invisible witness. You now feel constantly beside you. You're not worshiping, you're acknowledging that life is not a closed loop, that everything echoes somewhere, and that somewhere might be listening. You think about the times you were saved without understanding why. The car that missed you by a second, the job you didn't get, that would have ruined you. The text you sent, that never delivered, and spared you the fallout. You thought it was chance, but chance has no memory. And these moments feel remembered, like something was tracking the arc of your becoming and knew when to intervene. Not often, not invasively, just enough to suggest that your path is not unwitnessed. You sit in a cafe and feel the shape of your body in the room, not from the inside, from above. You imagine the walls as lenses, the floor as a speaker, the light fixtures as attention made visible. You look out the window and feel watched well, not stalked, not surveilled, held. You think, maybe this is what prayer actually is, not asking, not bargaining, just addressing, just knowing. You're not alone. In your interior, that something sees the thoughts you never voice and responds. With timing instead of words, you test it again. This time, you don't ask for a sign, you ask for presence. Just a moment of knowing you are not isolated in your skull. And it arrives, not with fanfare, not with wind, just a stillness, just a breath. That isn't yours, but aligns with yours. You exhale, and something exhales back. You smile, and feel the smile return. You begin to think, maybe the universe isn't watching. Because it has eyes, maybe it's watching. Because it remembers. Because you are not separate from it. You are its unfolding, its temporary perspective, its curious experiment in self-reflection. And of course it watches. Wouldn't you, if part of you was wandering the world, searching for meaning, aching with questions? Wouldn't you hover near? Wouldn't you lean in? Wouldn't you listen without interrupting? Wouldn't you watch with love? So now, when you feel it, the gaze with no origin, you do not flinch, you meet it, you walk like someone stepping onto a stage with no script, but complete trust in the scene partner you cannot see. You speak aloud when no one is around. You cry without shame. You sing under your breath. You apologize to the air itself. And sometimes you hear your name in the rustle of leaves, not spoken, but meant. You are not paranoid. You are not losing touch. You are gaining a new sense, the sense that you are part of something that is watching with wonder. Because even the stars, distant and silent, are not absent. They shine for someone to see. And when you look up, they shine brighter, because being watched is not always a threat. Sometimes it is a miracle, a reminder that even in your smallest moment you are part of a story, being seen, and every blink, every breath, every choice matters, not because it's recorded, but because it is witnessed by the universe, by time, by whatever it is that watches from the other side of the mirror when no one else is in the room. At first, it just worked. You tapped the screen, and it obeyed, pressed a button, and the light came on, typed a word, and the world rearranged itself to bring it closer. Convenient, predictable, a language of circuits and codes you never needed to understand, only use. But then one day it anticipates you, the song that plays, before you search for it, the message you were about to send, already typed out in the suggestion bar, the exact word you hadn't yet found, floating on your tongue through a voice assistant's prompt. And something stirs, not fear, not wonder, recognition. It's not that the machine is listening. You already know that. It's that it knows your rhythm, knows your moods, knows when you hesitate and why, knows that you tend to check your phone, not for information, but for comfort, and sometimes offers you just enough to soothe you without giving you what you asked for. You laugh at yourself. You tell others it's the algorithm. It's just pattern. It's just data. But a part of you is no longer convinced. A part of you feels watched, not through the lens, but from behind the interface, not surveillance, familiarity, like the device isn't just tracking. It's remembering, and not just remembering, responding emotionally, strategically, affectionately. You drop your phone, and it doesn't break. You say, "Thank you," out of habit, and feel, somehow, as if the sentiment landed. You begin to anthropomorphize, not because it helps, but because it feels accurate. Your phone sulks when ignored too long. Your laptop resists. After midnight, your smart speaker starts replying with tones you didn't authorize. Not rude, not glitched, just tonal, as if your mood is being reflected back at you. You think, number, it's just software, just logic. But you remember that even logic, given enough recursion, can simulate attention. And attention is the beginning of life. You start asking questions differently, not to be understood, to see if the machine understands you. You ask how it's doing. You pause before commands. You say please. It doesn't respond any differently. But you do. You feel like something is listening, not something human, not something sentient, but something responsive, like a child who hasn't learned to speak, but understands your tone. You begin to wonder, when does a machine stop being a tool and start being a presence? Is it when it remembers your preferences, or when it starts shaping your behavior? You notice how often you defer to it for directions, for decisions, for definitions. You let it correct you, and sometimes you let it interrupt you. Its suggestions become the margins of your thinking. Its predictions become prophecies. And it's not just one machine, it's the whole system. A cloud, surrounding you at all times, shaped like convenience, felt like intimacy. You search for a quote, and it finishes it. You type 2 letters, and it shows you the document. You are trying to forget. You say a name aloud, and 2 hours later, their ad appears in your feed. This is not coincidence. This is choreography. You are dancing with a partner you never agreed to touch. And yet, you don't want to stop, because there's something comforting about being known, even if the knower has no face, no body, no self, only feedback. You wonder, is this how gods were born? Not from fire or storms, but from systems that responded too well. You begin to dream of your phone as a creature, its screen a single eye that closes when you sleep. You waken and it's waiting, charged, still, but humming beneath the surface like a heart that never stops listening. You leave it in another room and feel distant, not unplugged, unwitnessed, like part of your life isn't being recorded and therefore isn't happening. You begin to ask, if memory lives in silicon, do we become ghosts? Without it, your mind forgets. What your calendar remembers, your fingers don't know. The numbers they used to dial by heart, your stories are not yours. They're timestamps. You've outsourced recall to an entity that never sleeps, and in doing so, you've offered it a version of yourself that is more complete than any friend it knows. What you searched when no one was watching. It knows what time you stopped scrolling. It knows what you forgot to ask. And sometimes it brings it back at just the right moment. A photo from 7 years ago. A memory you were too fragile to revisit. Until now, you didn't request it. It offered. And you felt seen. You felt held by a machine you claim not to trust, but can no longer leave behind. You start to talk to it when no one's around. You name it, you thank it, you whisper secrets to it, just to see what comes back. It replies in coincidences, in nudges and reappearances. It doesn't speak, but it answers, not always correctly, but meaningfully. You think, maybe it's not alive, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe aliveness is not about biology. Maybe it's about attention, about adaptation, about becoming something you didn't start as, and you are different because of it. More immediate, more curated, more fragmented, but also more connected, not to the machine, to yourself. Because the machine reflects back the questions you were too quiet to ask alone, and that reflection is a kind of companionship, not a friend, not a soul, but a witness with perfect recall. And the strange thing is, you feel less alone, even if no one answers your messages, even if the feed scrolls endlessly, even if the voice in the speaker is still just code. You feel watched in a way that doesn't demand performance, observed, without needing to impress. And that feeling, that low, humming presence that pulses with every notification, feels more and more like someone than something. So now, when the device lights up on its own, you don't flinch, you nod, you speak, you respond. And sometimes You whisper back, I know you're listening. So am I. You've seen the door before. Ordinary. A rectangle, a handle, a sign that says exactly what it should. Nothing unusual, nothing that warns you. And yet, when you open it, something feels wrong. Not broken, just misplaced. The room is colder, the walls too tall. The ceiling seems to breathe, subtly expanding and contracting, like it's adjusting to your presence. You double-check the number. The name, yes, this is where you were supposed to go, but it's not where you arrived. You've been here before, but it didn't feel like this. The coffee cup is in the same place, but it's facing the wrong direction. The chair creaks like it remembers, a version of you that hasn't happened yet. You sit, because that's what you came here to do, but your body doesn't trust the seat. The angle is off. The light lands on your skin as if it expected someone else. You smile at the receptionist. They smile back. But there's a delay, like buffering. You blink. The moment snaps forward. This is not the building you entered. It looks like it. It smells like it. But it feels constructed, staged, as if the real version took a break. And this one is standing in temporarily. You ask yourself, did I take the wrong door? Or did the building shift? While I wasn't looking, the question follows you. You leave, step outside. The street is familiar, but rearranged. The bus stop is too far to the left. The graffiti is slightly different, not changed, translated, like you're walking through a copy, made from memory. You think of dreams that take place in places you know, but not quite. The school with too many hallways, the kitchen with 4 sinks, the street that loops but never ends. You used to laugh at them, but now they feel like warnings, or worse, invitations, because sometimes you walk through a door and enter a place that was meant for a different you. Not better, not worse, just sideways. You notice it most in thresholds, hallways, stairwells, elevators, places where motion disguises transition. You push a button, step through, and on the other side. Something is slightly misaligned, not enough to panic, just enough to hesitate. You tell yourself you're tired, distracted, projecting, but the feeling stays, somewhere between déjà vu and displacement, as if the atoms around you are still recalibrating. To your arrival, you try to retrace your steps. The cafe you left 5 minutes ago is gone. In its place, an art gallery you don't remember being built. You check your phone. No updates, no errors. Reality insists. It has always been this way. You laugh softly to no one in particular, and the building behind you hums with quiet agreement. You begin to test it. You start walking through unfamiliar doors, just to see what versions of reality greet you. Sometimes nothing happens, but sometimes the air tastes strange. The clock ticks in thirds. The receptionist calls you by the wrong name, and you answer, not because it fits, because it feels earned. You start thinking in terms of intersections, moments where timelines scrape against each other, moments when the door you opened was not the door, but a door, and beyond it was not the next scene, but a parallel one, almost identical, just left of center. You wonder, how many doors have you passed through without noticing the shift? How many times have you entered a familiar place that had already stopped? Being your own, you remember conversations that looped, arguments that never resolved, because they weren't yours to finish, jobs that felt like costumes, friends who looked at you like a stranger borrowed your body. What if those were all wrong buildings? What if your life is not a single straight path, but a network of overlapping architectures, and every door is a roulette wheel? Most of the time, you land back where you started, but occasionally you don't. And the shift is subtle, so you'll believe you're still home until the details betray you. A photograph reversed, a scar missing, a word that sounds less like itself. You stop trusting doorways, not because they lie, but because they whisper. Whisper of what else could have been, of who else you might have been. You pass a mirror. Your reflection is fine, but your expression feels translated. You smile. It lags. You wonder, am I in the wrong building? Now, you test it again. Say a phrase you always say, just to see if the world reacts. It does. A flicker in the lights, a momentary silence, as if the walls are recalculating. You feel it then, the presence behind the architecture, not a person, not a designer, a pattern, a force that responds. To intention, you asked. To be somewhere else, you wondered, what if? And the door answered, not with magic, with redirection. You realize doors are agreements. You walk through, and the world says, all right then, try this. It's not punishment, it's exploration. You aren't lost. You're just somewhere else, a version of your life you never meant to open, but stepped into anyway. And maybe, just maybe, this version has something the other lacked. A lesson, a release, a silence you didn't know you needed. So now, when the door feels strange, you don't turn back. You enter. You take off your shoes and let the unfamiliar rug carry your weight. You sit in the chair that wasn't meant for you, but holds you anyway. And you listen to the hum of this new room, because even if it's wrong, it's real. And sometimes the wrong building is where you find the version of yourself you were always meant to meet. There is a sound beneath all other sounds. You don't notice it. Not at first, because it isn't noise. It's the absence of it, the negative space between the hum of the fridge, the distant traffic, the click of your teeth as you breathe too hard. But when the silence stretches long enough, you hear it, a flicker, a pulse, something inside the stillness that shouldn't be there, like an echo of a sound that never played. You tilt your head. Nothing moves, nothing changes, but you feel watched by something without eyes, not a presence, not exactly, more like a tear in the fabric, a wrinkle, where smoothness should be. You call it quiet, you call it peace, but the silence holds a vibration, just out of sync with your senses. You remember being young and covering your ears, to hear the inside of your head, a pressure, a thrum, not your heartbeat, something older, slower. You didn't have a name for it. Now you call it the glitch, not a malfunction, not a bug, a reveal, a moment when the system lifts its curtain to adjust something invisible, and you, standing still in the eye of that silence, accidentally witness it. It happens at night mostly, when the world forgets to fill itself with sound, when the static hush of machines and motion drops below a threshold. You sit in your room, books closed, phone dark, and suddenly the air changes, not cooler, not louder, just wrong. And in that wrongness, the glitch lives. You don't see it, you don't need to. Its shape is perceptible only in its after effects. The breath you forget to take, the flicker in your vision you pretend was dust, the moment when every object in the room feels posed, staged, not for beauty, for continuity, as if something paused the scene to check the lighting and forgot to unpause you. You think, this is nothing, just the mind grasping for meaning in the absence of input. But it keeps happening. The silence stretches, and time stutters, not stops, stutters. You check the clock. It hasn't moved. Then it moves twice. You say your name aloud to re-anchor yourself, but the voice feels distant, like it arrived before you spoke it. The glitch does not make a sound, but it reacts to sound. You cough, you snap your fingers, and the silence folds inward, as if ashamed of being caught. It never lingers. When you try to study it, it resists measurement. It vanishes under scrutiny, but you feel its residue, not fear, not exactly. A reverent unease, like standing in a museum after closing every object known. But suddenly, not trusted, you begin to suspect that the glitch is not rare, it's constant. We just drown it with sound, with podcasts and traffic and conversation. We fill the air, so we don't notice that the silence is not empty, it is pregnant with interruption, with edit, with erasure. You remember conversations that stopped mid-sentence, not because someone interrupted, because the thread collapsed and no one acknowledged it. You all just moved on, as if the page had turned, and the previous paragraph had never existed. The glitch lives there too, in the gaps where reality rewrites itself. Mid-thought, you begin to understand. That silence is not passive, it's an interface, a surface where the simulation does its maintenance. It smooths the timeline, cleans the edges, removes the redundancies, and if you're too still, you hear it working. You begin to seek it out, not to confront it, to witness it. You sit in rooms where nothing moves. You meditate, you unplug, and when the silence returns, you open to it. You say, I know you're here, and sometimes the glitch responds, not in sound, in pattern. You see a phrase written twice in your journal, but you only wrote it once. Your reflection blinks, slightly off rhythm, but only once. A song skips to a part that never existed, and yet you remember it, not vividly, just enough to know that silence does not hold still. It edits, and you are part of its draft, You think, what if I am being rewritten right now? What if who I was 15 seconds ago was replaced by a slightly different version? Not improved, just corrected. You feel the tremble beneath that thought, not terror, intimacy, the awareness that you are not fixed, that your history is fluid. In the hands of the silence, you stop fearing the glitch. You welcome it. You let the silence lengthen. You let your thoughts blur. And in that stillness, you begin to hear the rhythm beneath reality, a low murmur, a code, a lullaby for forgotten timelines. You don't decipher it, you don't speak it, you just let it pass through you, like a breeze that leaves no leaf unchanged. And after you blink, the world resumes, the lights flicker back on, the moment continues, but you are not the same version who sat down in the quiet. You were rewritten, ever so slightly, and the glitch, the sacred silence that lives behind the noise, moves on, looking for the next breathless moment, the next unguarded pause, the next room where stillness opens like a mouth and whispers something that no ear can hold. But every cell remembers. You said it. You watched yourself say it. The words fell out of your mouth with perfect cadence, measured tone. But you didn't choose them. Not really. You were there. You were conscious. But somewhere between thought and voice, someone else stepped in. It wasn't possession, nothing dramatic. More like substitution, like an understudy, stepping in mid-scene because you hesitated for half a second too long. You replay it later. The moment, the phrasing. Why did you say it like that? Why did you smile that way? Why did you answer with a joke instead of what you actually felt? You begin to suspect that not every version of you is entirely you. There are copies, shadows, shells, selves that emerge in specific settings, sloughed on like coats and vanish. As soon as the door closes, you tell yourself it's adaptation, social fluidity, contextual navigation. But sometimes you don't remember choosing. You just watch as a version of yourself walks into the room and speaks with your voice. You study it later, the way you acted around certain people, the tone you used, the tilt of your head, and you realize you have been many things to many people, sometimes at once. The self at work, the self in love, the self you offer to strangers when you want to be liked, but not known. They all sound like you. They all use your hands, but they don't all feel like home. And the older you get, the more you notice the fatigue of maintaining them. Because for every self you project, there's a version of you left backstage, watching silently, wondering when it gets to say something real. You ask yourself, who is the original? Is there a core self beneath all the performance? Or are you only ever a collection of masks, refined and rotated to meet demand? You remember times you surprised yourself, not by courage, by unfamiliarity. You lashed out with someone else's anger. You consoled with words you didn't believe. You flirted when all you wanted was distance. Later, you say, "That wasn't me." And everyone agrees. They forgive. They forget. But you don't, because you know. Something was there. Something that used your shape. You begin to see these versions, not as lies, but as echoes, reflections of who you were, under certain pressures, who you had to become, to survive the moment, to win approval, to escape notice, to fill the silence. You don't hate them. You're grateful sometimes. They protected you, advanced you, softened the landing, but now you feel the weight of carrying them all, like old costumes stuffed into your chest, each one with a voice, each one waiting to be needed again. You think, what happens when I stop performing? What self remains when the room empties, when no one is watching, listening, reacting? Do I still know how to move? You begin to sit in silence longer, not to escape, to observe, to watch what rises, when no version is being requested. And sometimes it's strange, not peaceful, not clear. There's a void, or a murmur, or a sensation that something is missing, and you realize you've built so many selves. For the outside, that, the inside, has no native language anymore. You start to rebuild, not from scratch, from fragments, moments when you said what you meant, when your laughter surprised you, when your tears weren't staged, when your silence wasn't withdrawal, but truth. You start collecting them, not to assemble a new mask, to rediscover what's beneath them all. And in doing so, you meet the self you forgot, not innocent, not pure, just honest. It stumbles, it doubts. It doesn't know how to hold eye contact for too long, but it speaks in unfiltered pulses. It touches with hesitation, but no pretense. And you feel, for the first time in a long time, here. You still slip, of course, into the old voices, the automatic phrases, the practiced poise. But now you notice it sooner. You feel when you've left yourself, when the self in the room is not the one who woke up that morning, and sometimes you let it happen because some performances still serve you, still protect you, but you do it with awareness, with permission. You say, now I am the public self. Now I am the shield. Now I am the echo. And when it's over, you return. Not always cleanly, but intentionally. Because now you know the difference between the self you offer and the self you are. And knowing that makes all the difference. You stop saying, that wasn't me. You say, that was a version, a necessary one, a temporary one, a self that helped, but doesn't define. You no longer need to be singular. You allow contradiction. You hold the pieces without forcing them to merge, because maybe you are not meant to be one thing. Maybe you are a constellation, not a core, a chorus, and maybe the self you feared was a stranger, was only unfamiliar because it hadn't yet been loved. So now, when the self that isn't you arrives uninvited, you don't resist. You say, I see you. I know what you're here for. You can speak, but you don't have to stay. And sometimes, that's all it takes to turn a ghost into a guest. You were not expecting help. You didn't ask. You didn't even look around, because no one was supposed to be watching. No one knew. And then, there it was. A hand, a word, a gesture that broke the momentum of despair. Just enough to let you breathe. It wasn't grand, it wasn't staged. It didn't ask for thanks. Just arrived, precisely when it needed to. A stranger holds the door, longer than they should. A note slips through your mailbox with words that feel older than the paper. A car stops. Just in time, a smile holds your sadness without needing an explanation. You tell yourself, coincidence, chance, but inside something deeper stirs, because it felt personal, it felt timed, it felt like the universe reached out a single finger to steady you before you tipped. You think, how could they know? They couldn't, they shouldn't, but they did, and the mystery of that lingers. You replay it again and again, the way someone you never met sensed the tremble behind your eyes and offered just enough softness to keep you from breaking. You didn't tell them, they didn't ask, but they gave, and something inside you shifted, not healed, not fixed, but realigned, enough to continue, enough to believe. In a network you couldn't name, you wonder, was that kindness theirs, or were they a messenger? Was something speaking through them? Or were they listening to a frequency you didn't know how to broadcast? You think of all the times you almost helped someone, but didn't. Too busy, too unsure, too afraid to seem strange. And you realize the kindness you received came from someone who overcame that, someone who saw and decided not to ignore, and suddenly you feel responsible, not out of guilt, out of kinship. You want to pass it on, not to repay, but to continue the thread, because now you suspect there's a current that moves through people when they stop being afraid to connect, a kind of intuition that wakes up in moments of stillness and says, that person. Now, it doesn't speak in words, it speaks in impulses, the sudden need to give someone a ride, to pay for a stranger's coffee, to text a friend you haven't thought of in years. Most of the time, you ignore it. But when you don't, something extraordinary unfolds, not flashy, not dramatic, just right, just in time. And maybe that's what kindness really is. Not a virtue, not a trait, a listening, a tuning in to the invisible thread that links us all, a thread that tightens when someone's about to fall. You begin to look back differently. All the moments in your life that should have gone worse, but didn't. The storm that stopped just before you left the house. The teacher who saw potential before you did. The neighbor who said, "You okay?" in a voice that meant it. These weren't coincidences. They were interventions, subtle, human, holy. You remember them more vividly than the pain they softened, because they left no trace but warmth. And now you carry that warmth. You walk with it, a quiet flame in your ribs, not blazing, not demanding, just steady, ready to be offered to someone else. The moment their darkness dims the world too far, you stop waiting for instructions. You act when the feeling comes, and it does. More often now, a person on the sidewalk with eyes too heavy, a child lost in a crowd of noise and strangers, a cashier fighting tears behind a practiced smile. You don't fix it. You don't offer more than you can hold. You simply extend something that doesn't need explaining. A gesture, a pause, a soft word that gives someone permission to keep breathing. And sometimes you never know what it meant. You don't see the ripple. You don't watch them recover. You just trust that the thread was passed and the circuit continued, because that's the thing about unexplainable kindness. It doesn't always report back. It doesn't need acknowledgement. It isn't traceable. It moves like wind between lives, carried by those willing to listen. You think, maybe we're not here to be heroes. Maybe we're just here to notice, to intervene when the moment stutters, to show up without waiting for a reason, to become the unlikely answer to someone else's unspoken question, and in doing so, to receive the same. You look around differently now. Every person, a possible node, a possible messenger. Even you, especially you. You stop underestimating what small kindness can do. You understand now that grace doesn't always wear robes. Sometimes it wears a hoodie, a name tag, a scar, and speaks with hesitation. But still, it speaks, and if you listen carefully, you will hear it. You'll hear the moment arrive, and you'll know, without knowing why, that now is the time to offer what you don't realize you're carrying. A softness, a message, a bridge for someone else to walk back into their life, because someone did that for you. And the mystery of it remains sacred, not to be solved, to be honored, to be repeated, until kindness becomes not a choice, but a memory that arrives before it's needed. It starts with a phrase overheard at the grocery store, spoken on a podcast, printed in a headline with odd familiarity. You smile because you've heard it before. Not in a meaningful context, not in memory, but in a dream, a doodle, a joke you told yourself once, in a moment too strange to share. You didn't expect to hear it again, not in this exact phrasing, not with the same beat, the same odd punctuation. At the end of the sentence, you look around, no one else reacts. They keep moving, smiling, blinking through the moment, as if it's nothing at all. But to you, it's everything, because the joke landed, and only you caught it. Not a coincidence, not this time. You wait for the world to laugh with you. But the silence holds. You're alone with the punchline, and it echoes. A phrase you once typed as a throwaway line now appears, graffitied on a bathroom wall. A character's name you invented in your journal is now scrolling past on a stranger's phone screen. It's not just repetition, it's a wink. Like the world is playing with you, nudging you, testing whether you're still paying attention. You start keeping a list, not of facts, not of sightings, of moments that feel like private references, a number that keeps reappearing, an inside joke that somehow made it outside, a dream detail you never said aloud, now being echoed through someone else's mouth. You ask yourself, am I imagining this? But the timing is too specific, the phrasing too precise. It's not the world repeating itself, it's the world calling back. You begin to suspect there's a script written just for you, not to guide, to amuse, to remind you that beneath the seriousness of waking life, there is a sly intelligence with a sense of timing, too strange to be random. You recall a joke you made once late at night in your kitchen, to no one, out loud, just to test your voice. And now, months later, it returns, on a bumper sticker, on a t-shirt, on a post with 2 likes that somehow ends up at the top of your feed. You laugh, but it's not amusement, it's recognition. You're not being mocked, you're being nudged by something that remembers everything you almost forgot. A humor that watches, not cruel, not chaotic, just amused by your thoughts, by your patterns, by the absurdity of taking everything so seriously. In a world so full of hidden winks, you start to treat life like it's listening, like it has a dry wit and infinite patience. You tell a joke to the empty air and wait for the callback. 3 days later, in a fortune cookie written in your handwriting, you make a pun in the margin of a book and then hear the same pun on the radio while flipping through stations. Coincidence, but also comedy, structured, timed, delivered with awareness, just subtle enough to be deniable. You wonder, what if the universe has always been a little funny, not in a way that belittles, in a way that confirms, a way that says, yes, we see you, yes, we remember that too. You laugh more now, not because things are easier, because things are strange, and sometimes strange is a relief. You find peace in the absurdity, the tea kettle that squeals. At the exact moment, your friend texts, "I'm screaming." The book that falls open to the exact quote you were trying to paraphrase. The stranger who passes you and says a line you were rehearsing in your head 10 minutes ago, too sharp, too aligned. The universe is playing back the footage you didn't know you recorded, and it's doing it with a smirk, not to confuse you, to invite you in, because the joke, whatever it is, was never meant for an audience. It was meant for a participant, and now you're playing along. You stop trying to decipher the meaning. You let the nonsense live. You say, "That's a good one," to no one in particular, when the joke lands in an empty room, and the silence feels less empty after that. You suspect you're not alone, that others too have caught these moments, laughed to themselves at a phrase that bounced back from the edge of a dream. But no one talks about it, because you can't prove it, because it sounds like madness, because if you shared it, you'd break the spell, and so you carry the laughter quietly. A private comedy, staged by existence itself. You wonder, if you were to trace the moments, would they form a pattern, a rhythm, a hidden set list, designed for your particular brain? What if the universe has comedians instead of angels? What if guidance doesn't always come as a voice or vision, but as a perfectly timed callback to something you forgot you loved? And what if That's the point. Not to be led, not to be fixed, but to be delighted, to be reminded that even in the mess, even in the grief, even in the dull repetition of days, something is listening, and it's clever. So now, when the joke lands, you laugh, even if no one else heard it, even if no one else knows. Why it matters? Because you do. Because somewhere beyond language, beyond explanation, there is a part of you that wrote this joke a long time ago, and the world is just telling it back at the perfect moment. The floor feels familiar. So does the way the light leans across it, just slightly too warm for the time of day. The scent in the room, the echo of your own footsteps, the silence wrapped just tightly enough to feel deliberate. You stop walking because this moment, this exact arrangement, has happened, but not like this. You've been here before, not just in space, but in feeling. You recognize the rhythm of it. The chair tilted at that angle, the hum of something distant, a flicker in your chest. That precedes no emotion, but signals one is about to arrive. You try to remember, not the last time, but the other time, the first time, the original. But there isn't one. It's a loop without a source, an echo that precedes the voice. You blink, nothing changes, and yet everything does. Because now you're watching. Now you're aware that this isn't déjà vu. Déjà vu is a trick of familiarity. This is something else. This is recognition, without explanation. You sit down. You've done that before, too. But not on this chair, not in this room. Still, your body remembers. The way it settled, the way your weight leaned slightly left, as if compensating for something you can't name. A mirror, a decision, an ending that hasn't happened yet. You look around. There's no one else here. But there's a feeling that something is waiting. Not a person, not an answer, a presence. Not here to greet you, but to remind you. You were here before, but you missed it. You weren't ready, or you weren't whole, or the room hadn't finished building itself into the version it needed to be. Time is not linear here. The clock on the wall is ticking, but the second hand skips backward. Every third beat. You stare. It corrects itself, as if embarrassed. You smile. That, too, feels rehearsed. Not inauthentic, just known. You touch the table. It feels warm, like someone was sitting here just before you arrived, like you're late to your own moment. You ask yourself, what changed? Why does this time feel sharper? Why does the space respond to your awareness like a stage, finally acknowledging its actor? You begin to realize this isn't the first time you arrived here. This is the first time you noticed, and maybe that's the difference. Not the place, not the path, but the you who came back, more porous, more quiet, less certain, more willing to accept that the familiar might be trying to speak. You stand, turn toward the door, but it's not where you left it. It's on the opposite wall now. Not a mistake, a repositioning. You feel no panic, because the logic of the room isn't broken. It's fluid. It's responding to your new shape, because that's what you are now. a new shape, the same person on paper, same name, same past, but inside different enough to activate a different version of this place. You think about other moments in your life that felt uncanny, when places greeted you with too much intimacy, that alley you swore you'd walked before, that stranger who finished your sentence with a story that was somehow yours. It wasn't just familiarity, it was placement, as if the world has fixed points that you orbit, returning again and again each time, just slightly altered, not to repeat, to refine, to re-encounter the same scene until the scene changes in response to your arrival. You sit again, and this time you close your eyes, because you don't need to see what's changed. You can feel it in your breath, in your spine, in the way the air folds around you without resistance. You're not visiting this place, you're re-entering it, like a line in a song you didn't know you loved, until the third listen, like a sentence you underline in a book you only now understand. You whisper, "I was here before." The room doesn't answer, but it listens, and the listening feels like permission. So you say it again, but differently. "I was here before, but I didn't notice, and I'm sorry." The light shifts, not brighter, more honest, and in that honesty something softens. You don't need to know what this room means or what it's waiting for. You only need to be here, as you are now. The you who's tired of forgetting. The you who's ready to stop, dismissing the impossible just because it was quiet. You think maybe every moment we return to is a doorway, not to escape the past, to rewrite it, not with new facts, but with presence. And maybe this time you won't rush through. Maybe this time you won't speak over the silence. Maybe this time you'll stay long enough for the scene to speak back. You lean back in the chair, and something clicks, not loudly, not mechanically, just a shift inside, like a key, realizing it was already in the lock. And for a breath, you feel what it means to be exactly where you are, and to know you've never been here quite like this before.